This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation is still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr on assignment. Lisa Mateo in the house.
Very nice.
It's rare, but
Very
she's
nice.
here.
She's
Lisa
here.
Mateo here as well. We say good morning to all of you. I'm calling it Reset Monday. After
Okay.
the election,
Yep.
there's a lot of news. Are you on the short list for Treasury Secretary?
I'm not sure. I didn't get that phone call.
You didn't get that phone call yet. There's a lot of news. So Gura's down in Rio. We'll get to that.
Wow.
What is that about?
Yeah, exactly.
You send Lisa to Rio.
We
You
go to
don't
Boston.
send David
Yes,
Gura.
exactly.
At
That's a good
least
point.
it's like, yeah.
That's a good point.
We welcome all of you on YouTube. Over the weekend, lots of research on YouTube. We are humbled. Paul and I, we're fossils. I got the zenith
Yep.
with the antenna.
Yep.
You're doing better
Works
than
just
that.
fine.
We're catching up on YouTube. Good morning to all of you across the nation. Good evening across the Pacific Rim on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast, growing each and every day. Good morning on your commutes as well. 99.1 FM in a turned upside down Washington. Henrietta Treyz will join us. We'll talk about Washington with Mr. Gura as well at the G-20 meetings. Good morning, Bloomberg 1130 in New York. Are we talking congestion tax, or is it like such a sensitive issue?
I think Mr. John
$9?
Tucker, I think it's back at $9. It's not $15, it's $9, but still, it's a tax.
It's a new, and we'll have that news for you through the day here in New York City. In Boston, 92.9 FM. Good morning. Can I editorialize before we get the show started?
Sure, let it rip.
Legal Seafoods, Terminal A, the best food in any airport I've ever been in.
That is strong.
Zurich is awfully good.
Zurich is awfully good.
And I was...
The lobster roll. I thought the lobster roll.
I had the haddock, and I'm like, are you kidding me? This is an airport?
That's what you do
It
in
was
Boston.
reasonably priced. I called Rebello, keeper of the MX.
Yep.
I said, can I splurge?
Pre-approved.
It was pre-approved.
Exactly.
Good morning. All of Legal Seafood at 92.9 FM in Boston. We had a great time up there with President Collins, Michael McKee, with that important interview. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Monday Flash, Lisa Mateo.
I'm curious to see what beverage of your choice went along with that dinner. We're going to have to talk about that later. Oh.
Iced tea.
Iced tea. Oh, boo. Okay, markets right now. We are struggling for direction. Futures are mixed right now. NASDAQ futures leading the gains are up about 0.3% right now. A big part of that, Tesla shares up 7%. Sources saying President-elect Donald Trump's team looking to encourage the development of fully self-driving vehicles. So that's the reason for the increase in those shares. We'll head over to S&P futures right now. Little changed, up about 4 points. Dow futures down 0.2%, 112 points. We have the 2-year yield, 4.31%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.47%, and that's up 2 basis points. To currencies, the dollar, little change. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. That's reaching a 2-year high last week. Japanese yen right now, it is down about 0.4%, 155.04 against the dollar. That's after the Bank of Japan governor avoided giving that clear hint that he will raise interest rates at a December meeting. Bitcoin recovered from its biggest 2-day retreat since the U.S. vote, moving past 90,000 mark. Right now it's at 90,490. And shares of Nvidia falling down 2%. The information reported the company asked suppliers to redesign those server racks for its new Blackwell GPUs, and that's leading to some worries about delays. And finally, another company making news, Spirit Airlines filed for bankruptcy in New York. Assets, liabilities between $1 billion and $10 billion. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Have you flown it, Lisa?
No, I have, yes, I have.
Is it like
It's
Southwest?
It's
is it
tight.
like People's Distress? I mean,
it's a little bit smaller. You got to pack a smaller luggage, but I mean, not bad. But yeah, bankruptcy.
Okay.
Yeah, well, the regulators knocked back 2 potential mergers that might have saved it.
Right.
So here you go. Is that what you wanted, regulators?
We start with a huge issue this morning. Great lineup, really across all of equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, international relations, of course, all that's going on in Washington. Deborah Cunningham helps us start strong. Federated Hermes, Global Money Markets, CIO. When you hear a headline, Deborah, of $7 trillion in money market funds, how does a pro react to that?
I think it's long overdue, Tom. When I look at the amount of assets that are out there in the system, from retail and institutional, in the cash markets, in deposit products, in direct securities, money market funds continue, even though the Fed has lowered rates at this point, they continue to be the highest earning class from a cash perspective. So I think 7 trillion is not a high water mark for this cycle, certainly. Yet I think it represents the understanding and the value in the market for those funds.
You see this on YouTube. Deborah's in this dark cavern. It's beneath Federated
exactly.
in Pittsburgh. It's an ancient. It's like
That's
Raiders
where they
of the
manage
Lost
the
Ark.
cash. That's where they manage the cash. Hey, so Debbie, so what is our Federal Reserve going to do? I was kind of under the impression that once they started cutting rates, they were just going to continue cutting rates through 2025. But now the economic data's come in pretty strong here. I'm not sure what they're going to do. How do you envision it?
I think at this point, sorry about that.
There we got a little friend there in the background.
It's really not a dark cavern. I think at this point sorry. I think at this point we have a period of time where the Federal Reserve is in flux to some degree. The expectation is for lower rates, but maybe not to what had been, expected from a terminal rates perspective. I think the market, and the last time the Federal Reserve did a series of economic projections, had the terminal rate at 2.9%, the market around 3%. I think you're something below 4% for a terminal rate, but I believe that you start skipping meetings maybe in December.
Okay.
If not in December, then certainly as we go through 2025. So, and maybe you get to the second half of 25 and it's, rolling it into a quit sort of mode for a while till we see what type of economic effect some of the new administration's policies will have and what that might do to inflation as well.
That's kind of where I wanted to go, Debbie. How are you guys at Federated Hermes on the short end of the curve? How are you guys thinking about kind of what we've seen happen with the elections and the change in leadership starting in January?
Well, it's hard to come up with any exact conclusions at this point, but the expectation is that growth will be a little bit stronger than had been initially expected. We think any kind of recession thoughts are way behind us at this point. So we were looking for, sort of a soft landing. Maybe it's less than or a little bit more than a soft landing, and something that's a little bit more moderate at this point, with economic growth picking up in the second half as policies are implemented that are a little bit more favorable. On the other hand, when you see some of the tariffs and potential tax cuts and what that might do from a debt ceiling standpoint, it's not a smooth outlook for 2025. So we think there will be lots of opportunity for the Fed to make decisions as the markets sort of unfold.
I got two questions. First of all, are you bringing in duration? With all the political storm that we're in, Federated owns the high ground on this. Are you bringing in duration as an institution? Are you targeted, or are you moving out, extending duration?
Well, Tom, in our money market products, we're extending duration. We've been maintaining an extended duration, so we're overweight duration. On the fixed income side, we've been overweight. We're now at neutral. I actually took on a tactical short for a little while, and we're slightly underweight. At this point, we're back to neutral. There may be opportunity for us to gain a little bit more from an extension trade standpoint, but we don't think this is the exact right market to do so. So we're holding steady right now at neutral.
Now, one final thing. The offspring that just walked in behind you on Bloomberg Radio, Deborah's in this beautiful library, and we just got a vision of a Cunningham offspring. Do you force them to read Fibonacci at breakfast?
Well, we do math equations.
You do math equations.
Fibonacci yet, but we do math equations.
You do duration and convexity over their Fruit Loops.
Perhaps that might be the case. You've been at breakfast at my house before then, Tom, huh?
This is painful. Deborah Cunningham, thank you so much. It's Federated Hermes this morning here. And Paul, this is an important issue. What I'm hearing guest to guest is the 7 trillion is not monopoly money.
Yeah.
It's like permanent wall of cash money.
Yeah, and I don't know where it goes. You can sit there at a 2-year Treasury and get 4.3%. You can sit there in a money market and get a nice return here. I'm not sure why that money needs to move at all. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
And over the weekend, I read Barron's. Thank you for that, Barron's. And, there's like a whole indecision 2 weeks out from the election.
Yeah.
It's not just about who's going to be Treasury Secretary.
No, we had that nice big trade on risk on trade coming up in the 4, 5, 6 days after the election. We've given some of it back here. So I think the market's just trying to discount what could play out here from an economic policy
we're going to have
perspective.
to see. Got red and green on the screen right now. Futures up 4. Dow futures negative. The NASDAQ here 0.4% higher. A nice little move to it. 16.52 on the VIX. Okay, Sweeney had a tantrum in Boston. Tom, we're not doing BitDog enough. No.
Exactly.
So there we are. Got up
Here
to
we are.
93,000, but we're still, it didn't pull back.
No, I mean, we were at 90,000 right here. I mean, this is the new, I guess, normal, the risk on normal here for risk assets. Let's buy Bitcoin. Let's go crypto.
We'll have to see. We got to come back to Governor Khan, Professor Khan of Illinois, with Bitcoin being the new Beanie Baby. He was never in the Beanie Baby fad. With our news in New York, John Tucker.
All right, thanks, Tom and Paul. Welcome back, by the way. The debate over who President-elect Trump will select as his Treasury Secretary spiraled into uncertainty this weekend. Sources say Elon Musk spoke to potential pick Scott Bessent after already publicly endorsing another candidate, Howard Lutnick. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta says the Trump transition team isn't any closer to making his selection and is considering alternatives.
It did feel like Scott Bessent was going to be the no-brainer choice, and now it feels like that has been unseated by Howard Lutnick, coming back to the same issue, the question of tariffs and how tough you can go. Of course, it's not the only players in the kind of race to be the next Treasury Secretary. It's Robert E. Lighthizer, former U.S. Trade Representative, Bill Hagerty, a senator out of Tennessee, and even Mark Rowan, the CEO of Apollo.
Well, the Treasury Secretary oversees the $28 trillion treasuries market, as well as economic sanctions. President Biden giving Ukraine the green light to use Western-made missiles for long-range strikes on Russian territory. The shift in policy thought to be motivated by North Korean troops appearing on the battlefield. Speaking through an interpreter, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said any strikes on Russia would not be telegraphed in advance.
План посилення України – це план перемоги.
Today, there's a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions. But strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves.
Ukraine's President Zelensky speaking after a massive Russian aerial attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And just a week after winning a majority of the vote in several of the nation's largest Arab-majority cities, President-elect Donald Trump has filled top administration posts with staunch Israel supporters, including an ambassador to Israel who claim there's no such thing as Palestinians. These elections have prompted mixed reactions among Arab Americans and Muslims in Michigan, which went for Trump along with all 6 other battleground states. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Tom and Paul.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Paul, Mark Rowan, we visited with him at Apollo here 6-8 months ago.
Yep.
This guy's exceptional. Your father dies. You got to walk into your school and say, what do I do?
Yep.
And Penn wrote the ticket.
Right.
Till the billionaire could pay it back.
Exactly right. And he's repaid that in many times over, but certainly accomplished on Wall Street, that's for sure.
No question about it. And of course, his commitment to the UGA Federation of New York as well. Please stay with us worldwide. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures mixed, and this says traders await fresh direction on growth and also the path of interest rates. Housing, that leads this week's economic data. Today, the National Association of Home Builders, they report on November builder confidence. Tomorrow, it's the government's read on housing starts, and then Thursday, we move on to October home resales. So right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 70 points. Dow futures down 0.2%, 87 points. S&P futures little changed, up about 3. The 2-year yield, 4.31%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.47%, and that's up 2 basis points. To commodities, gold rose more than 1% after Goldman Sachs analysts predicted it would hit a record $3,000 an ounce by the end of next year. Right now, we have spot gold up more than 1% at $2,592 an ounce. And then we have Brent crude up about 0.7%, $71 a barrel. WTI crude, $67 a barrel. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We have the Japanese yen weaker, euro weaker, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up more than 1% at around 90,000. Companies making news. HSBC, it reportedly asked managers to reapply for their jobs in the firm's new corporate institutional banking division. Sources are saying several hundred managing directors, other senior bankers, they will be let go in the coming weeks. And the Wall Street Journal reporting CVS Health adding 4 new members to its board in its agreement with Glenview Capital Management. And finally, Manulife's financials board, it's announced that its CEO, Roy Gura, plans to retire in May of 2025. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, really eclectic group of guests today. Good conversation for you across the nation on your commute and on YouTube as well. You know, I got this wrong, Paul.
Okay.
YouTube podcasts is like exploding.
It is.
It's like ginormous.
It is. And advertisers are flocking to these podcasts, which is amazing. I mean, I think about the advertisers on ours. It feels like these are the network television advertisers from 20 to 30 years ago.
You were on the Gulfstream, on the Delta Shuttle, and somebody leans over and says to me, Tom, you're no Joe Rogan.
Yeah, exactly.
So there
trying your best, though. I know.
Was. We'll get. Somebody said, "Where's your movie review of The Rock?" We'll get to that with Lisa here in a moment. Right now, this is a really important discussion because she's got a very informed, different view. Maria Veitmanet joins us right now, head of equity research, really global markets view at State Street, and has some very strong opinions here about pro-U.S. Maria, what's the thing you fear out there? For Maria Veitmanet, what is the unknown right now?
Well, that's a brilliant question. I think market is, from my conversation with clients, from a look at our custodial database, we see people love US. So do I. And US exceptionally, that's the story there. And consensus is people hate Europe. Money moving out of Europe, and we see that in European stocks. We see it in, they flock into bonds, but they sell euro. So that's a consensus trade. I guess the question is when that changes. So that's really unknown. And you look across economic data, earnings data, and Europe really plays second fiddle. So maybe that's unknown when we go back.
But what's so important here is the media focus and the speculation focus is on central bank analysis between Lagarde and Powell. Isn't it mostly just about spirit of the economy and real GDP?
No, I agree with you. So we have this contrast between U.S. economies that being fairly strong and Powell being quite assertive, while European economy arguably already in recession, and we don't see the same assertiveness about in Europe. So definitely spirit of economy plays into it.
Maria, how about U.S. banks here? I mean, I think a lot of folks really crowded into that trade thinking that, boy, deregulation, which is good for the banks themselves, maybe even spurs M&A, which they will benefit from the fee side. How do you think about U.S. banks here?
Yeah, I agree with you. There is a lot of positivity about U.S. banks, and particularly with election. I mean, one thing I will probably counter is that investors are already really crowded in U.S. banks. So that's been probably the trade of this year. That's where positioning really increased. People build up position at the second best performing sector. And I think it's a little bit like proof of a pudding is an eating. So we need to see that deregulation. What we're seeing right now is kind of lending activity slowing, the need for provisioning is increasing, delinquencies are increasing. So it almost like feels like pig banks, but pricing and positioning is there. So I think I would fade that part of Trump trade rally. So yeah, one of those things that I will fade.
I'm not sure, and I think the market's a little bit unsure, Maria, how this administration may view big tech, Silicon Valley. What's your view at this stage?
Yeah, I have to say I've been a big proponent of tech stocks. I like them a lot, and to me, tech stocks, they have like moats around their business, and it's very, very difficult to compete with them, and hence the high margins. And I think with election, I think the risk of like extra regulation and extra kind of trying to build those kind of quasi-monopolies maybe reduced somewhat. So tech remains our like favorite quality play. So I think we're staying with the trade. I think the risks to the sector have gone down a little bit since election.
Is it still long U.S. and, I don't know, be a little bit more cautious on the rest of the world as it relates to equities?
Absolutely, 100%. So U.S. is where you have the most profitable companies, where you have the highest margins. And if we are worried about kind of economic slowdown, you definitely want to be in quality stocks. And yes, U.S. definitely looks much better than the rest of the world.
What do you look at Mag 7? I mean, you've got a wonderful perspective on this, Maria. We're all like cheerleaders for it because we're hardwired tech America. You take a different view. What do you do? Do you buy Mag 7 at the margin?
Yeah, no, I think with Mag 7, it's one area where we have best quality. And what to me is really interesting, so when we look at institutional investor holdings, what we see, it's very crowded sector. So every time we have a risk-off event in the market, could be related to tech, could be related to anything. Investors sell what they have. So they do sell tech stocks. And it creates volatility. But what's really interesting, every time volatility comes down and we have this wonderful kind of Fed put expectation, investors go straight back into tech. So yes, it is probably the most volatile sector and kind of subject to big moves. But inevitably, the quality argument, I think, pulls investors back in. So for us, it's kind of buy the dip in tech for sure.
Maria, thank you so much. Maria Vaitman with us with State Street here. There's a whole debate here. Do you stay with America? And what's great is the partition here, Paul, between the zeitgeist, what retail's doing, all in on stocks, all in on the retirement programs. And I see a Goldman Sachs thing on Zero Hedge where they're saying hedge funds are walking away right now from the market.
Yeah.
The dichotomy here is extraordinary.
It is. It's interesting. I mean, you look at the U.S. versus non-U.S. I mean, you look at the U.K. market, Tom, and the valuation just screams at you. It's like instead of paying 21, 22 times earnings you have to pay for this market, you can get into the U.K. market, 15 times earnings. Yeah. But again, you talk to folks and they're saying that's a little bit of a value trap there. Be careful there for the valuation there. But a lot of folks are just, as Maria was just saying here from State Street, they're long the U.S. market.
Bloomberg Surveillance, coast to coast. Can't say enough about Lucas Shaw's screen time. He's got a wonderful paragraph on the Gladiator to come.
Oh, boy.
You ready?
Yep.
I haven't seen the first Gladiator.
Oh, really?
I'm the only one east of the Mississippi River.
Crowe.
Fortunately, I also haven't seen Red One. Now, with our Dwayne Johnson, Chris Evans report, surveillance movie correspondent Lisa Mateo. Lisa, the headline and deadline is,
No, it's not good.
It's not good.
It costs so much to make, like
200
over 200 million.
Yeah.
And it only pulled in like 34.
It brought in 10.9 million on Friday, and 8 million of that was the Mateo clan.
I heard the reviews were just horrible. I feel bad for my friend, but I'm sure he made out, so that's fine.
Did you get a cameo in it?
But I did not get a cameo in it. But I don't know.
No, Paul,
this is
very
movie, right?
sad.
Paul,
it's a Christmas movie.
The deadline headline: is it a bomb or a streamer's rounding error?
Well,
do they care?
Yeah, they care because you need with that kind of box office. I mean, that kind of money that they invested in it, they needed a big box office, and they're not going to get it. Maybe streaming can help them out on the back end.
Anthony D'Alessandro, thank you so much for informing me at Deadline about a movie I'm not going to see. The Red One. We thank Lisa Mateo, Surveillance, theatrical correspondent. From New York, good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing. Call an Oppenheimer professional today. All right, we've got futures mix with President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Treasury Secretary still in focus this week, along with Nvidia earnings. That takes place on Wednesday. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 72 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 78 points. We have S&P futures little changed, up about 3 points. Now, Morgan Stanley's Michael Wilson, he's turning bullish, saying he sees the S&P 500 ending 2025 at 6,500. We head over to the bond market. The 2-year yield 4.31%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.47%, and that's up 3 basis points. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index little change. We have the Japanese yen weaker, euro weaker, the British pound stronger. Bitcoin right now up more than 1.5% at around 90,000. We mentioned Nvidia earnings, so let's start there. We have those shares down about 2%, and that's due to some worries about delays. You have the information reporting that it's asked suppliers to redesign those server racks for its new Blackwell GPU. Also reporting this week, retailers like Walmart and TJX. And finally, shares of Samsung. They're up more than 5% in South Korea after it announced a plan late Friday to buy back about $7.2 billion of its stock over the next year. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. I announce on a Friday, usually with a beverage of my choice in my hand to the house, I'm having a reading weekend.
Okay.
And I read like crazy this week, and I'm not going to bore you with the details now, folks, but it was very productive. And halfway through the reading, I said, all I want to talk to is Zach Cohen of Bloomberg News, Bloomberg Government.
Yep.
And Henrietta Treyz. She's with Veda Partners, and I'm lucky that she joins us right now and informs us about the great debate. Henrietta, I see different threads here, but can the new Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Majority Leader Thune of the Dakotas, the present leader McConnell of the Kentuckys, or whoever, can they delay, distract the march President-elect Trump wants with his appointees?
They can. I think that there is a real undercurrent of focus on both the House and Senate side around President-elect Trump's seriousness about some of the nominees that he has announced so far. And so there is this sort of wariness that the president-elect might do things that have not been done before in American history, such as sort of tell the House and Senate to go on recess so that he can nominate his appointees.
Can he do that?
There is a clause in the Constitution that allows the president-elect to do that. I think it would be extraordinarily explosive. And I think what I would state to clients is basically the autonomy that senators feel, the seniority they feel as having 6-year terms versus 4-year terms is a very real thing. You don't want to get between them and their incredible sense of importance in D.C.
To Republicans, and particularly Republicans in name only with that 6-year tenure, coming in, do they look at the president-elect as lame duck?
No, I don't think so. I think especially because there's going to be so many freshman senators, not just the turnover from the election, but all the senators that I expect the president-elect to tap to go into the administration. There could be as many as 9 freshman senators. And it's worth bearing in mind that over 75% of the House has only ever had Donald Trump as their Republican president. So there is this very real deference. Certainly it's held so far. It's only been 2 weeks, of course, but this very real deference. And I'd add on just one more layer here that the president is so much more popular than the down ballot Republicans. In some of these states, there were as many as 47,000 Republican voters who went in and pulled the lever for Trump and then left the ballot box. They did not vote Republican down the ticket. So a lot of those Republican members from specific swing states need to be deferential to Trump because that's what their voters want them to be.
So in effect, Henrietta, is there in fact a Senate opportunity to challenge some of these Trump appointees, or are they de facto, like the Matt Gaetzes of the world, are they going to happen?
No, I don't think they're going to happen. I think that the Senate is going to see itself as a temper of some of Trump's more aggressive instincts. So, for example, there's a very real effort right now from the Senate Republicans to see the ethics report on Matt Gaetz, which has allegations of drug use or sexual abuse, things like that. They want to know exactly what the ethics committee found. And so while we might not see that released into the public, they do want to see it internally as senators, and they are going to pull rank to try to get access to that.
I guess the next pick of note, particularly for Global Wall Street, is the Treasury Secretary. And there's, I guess, a little bit of confusion there about where the camp or the Trump administration, the Trump camp, what they'd like to see. What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, I think Scott Bessent has been the leader for the last couple months. I think that's probably still the case, although I do know that the Trump transition team has been trying to audition additional CEOs from Wall Street, from corporate America, to try to get somebody with staff that they can sort of plug and play right into the agency themselves. That component of wanting to have a lot of staff to bring with them is a really big deal. I'm really more interested in Bob Lighthizer and where he might go. I don't expect that to be a Treasury pick, but I do think that he'll be sort of a roving czar, which is something that we've seen the Trump transition team already attach onto as a good policy idea or governing idea. So seeing where Bob Lighthizer land, I think is probably the most important thing, particularly because he's so competent, and whatever he wants done on the tariff front is, I think, what we're going to see.
Henrietta, to get back to the recess issue, which I'm assuming this is like immediate. It's like the now. Can one scenario be the Senate says we're not going to recess, but then the House votes to recess, and that gives the president-elect a window to put Thune in his place? Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think that's roughly correct. I mean, as I said, we've never seen this done before. But if there's a disagreement between the House and the Senate, the president has the authority to step in and say, y'all can't play nicely together. I'm going to disband you for a period of time. And so long as it's more than 10 days, then he can start nominating recess appointments. And those people will be in for a specific period of time, probably like 2 years before the next turnover when the next Congress starts. But that's the dynamic that they would try. The disruption associated with that, I mean, 10 days is a really long time for your first 100 days agenda to just disband the House and Senate. That means, first and foremost, we're going to have the debt ceiling that's due January 1 in terms of the suspension expiring. So that clock is going to be ticking. We'll have other cabinet official appointments that they'll want to confirm. And then, obviously, the tax bill that you need to get to writing. You will not be able to do a budget, which is due the first Monday in February. There's a lot of stuff to be done, and 10 days is a very long time.
And, Paul, I saw that there's like 4,000 positions to fill. In 800 or 1,000 or 1,200 of them involve the president working with the legislative branch. It's not like 42 people.
Right. Exactly. That's the U.S. government. So, Henrietta, between now and Inauguration Day, what are some of the key things you're looking for, the mileposts that you're looking at that we should be focused on?
I am watching the Senate Finance Committee. What we're expecting there is for Mike Crapo, the incoming chair of the Senate Finance Committee, and who I expect will be the Budget Committee chair, Lindsey Graham. They need to huddle and get together to figure out what the scope of the tax bill is going to be. and therefore what the magnitude of deficit increases need to be. And those two gentlemen need to work together. Those committees have to work together, because in order for the tax bill to pass late next year, you have to have the budget first. So they effectively need to know the parameters of the tax bill right now. And so that is the process that is underway. There are going to be working groups formed to break out, energy tax policy, international tax policy, et cetera. And then they'll get with Lindsey Graham and say, this is the appetite of deficit increase that we need. Can you get this through your committee? And we should know that information before January 20th. The goal is to get some paper out to members by December.
Well, bring a senator from South Carolina back. Paul, I had no idea. 21 years he's been in the Senate. Senator Graham, is he going to be deferential to the executive branch? Or is he going to be, is President Trump says Republicans in name only? Is Senator Graham going to join other senators and say, no, you're not doing this to us?
I don't think so. And indeed, the Senate Budget Committee has gotten less obstructionist, less rhino in the last couple of weeks since the election even than it was before. Mitt Romney, for example, is no longer going to be on the committee. Chuck Grassley is not going to be on the committee. And I think you're probably going to see some of the freshman senators who just won their races rise up to those ranks. So the deferential part, or the part where you would stand up to the president in this realm, exists with deficit increases. I'd say the most proprietary piece of information in my brain is the understanding I have of what can get 51 votes from the Senate Republican Conference. I believe it will be the biggest reconciliation bill that we have ever passed in America, somewhere in the range of $2 to $2.5 trillion worth of deficit appetite. So in terms of that old school, hey, Republicans are concerned about fiscal spending, that's not going to be the case next year. There's going to be massive deficit increases, and we will know that number from Lindsey Graham with the Budget Committee votes, which is a very big deal.
Paul, can we agree we learned more from Henrietta Treyz in 7 minutes than all the weekend blather combined? Wow. Henrietta, that was a clinic with Veda Partners, just like incredibly value to get her perspective of the politics, but also the machinery.
And it appears,
it's
Tom,
almost like she's like Senator Byrd of West Virginia.
Exactly. I mean, neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all. I mean, and those numbers that she was quoting are just extraordinary. So.
And what do they mean for bonds? And I'm looking at the Sweeney yield right now, 4.31%, up 3 basis points in the 10-year, 4.46. The 10-year real yield, wow, 2.13%. That's a wow statistic this morning. Fred Green on the screen. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
Hi, Paul and Tom. The search for Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary has devolved into disarray. The president-elect fuming over the behind-the-scenes jockeying. After publicly endorsing Kenner Fitzgerald's Howard Lutnick, sources say tell Bloomberg that Trump confidant Elon Musk spoke to potential pick Scott Bessent this weekend. Now, Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel says Trump's considering other names, including Senator Bill Hagerty, the former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and Mark Rowan of Apollo, and adds they'll play a critical role in the incoming administration.
The Treasury Secretary, their main job is to oversee the Treasury market, which is one of the most important markets in the globe, with $28 trillion of Treasury securities that they're in charge of looking over. But they also will play a role in privately conveying reason to the new Trump administration with respect to how much they can potentially spend.
Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel. Over the weekend, Mr. Trump picked Brendan Carr as the new chair of the FCC. He also picked Chris Wright, who runs a Colorado-based fracking services company, to lead the energy department. President Biden gave Ukraine the green light to use Western-made missiles for long-range strikes on Russian territory. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin telling reporters, despite the change, the goal remains peace and ending the war.
All of us would want to see this resolved soon. Sooner versus later. But again, we want to make sure that Ukraine is in the best position to protect its interest, however it's resolved in the future. And I believe that, as you've heard me say before, at the end of the day, it will be resolved through negotiation.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. The shift in policy thought to be motivated by North Korean troops appearing on the battlefield to fight alongside Russian troops. And Spirit Airlines filing bankruptcy in the wake of greater competition from rival air carriers and financial troubles followed the scuttled merger with JetBlue, the airline filing Chapter 11 in New York. Beyoncé coming to your home on Christmas, provided you have Netflix, and her tuning into the Baltimore Ravens-Houston Texans game. Netflix announcing that the megastar will perform during halftime of the Christmas Day matchup in her hometown of Houston. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. Sideline 31, row N, the Sweeney seats, 50-yard line. Yale, Harvard, at Harvard, $623 each.
Wow.
That's a college football game.
Harvard's 8-1.
You have to do like a $100,000 donation just to get in the door.
I was offered 4 seats for the Giants game coming up.
Were you?
I was told nobody else wants them.
Exactly.
He couldn't sell them. And a parking space. All
That's
free.
even important.
I was asked, how much are you going to pay me?
Yes.
The Yale Bulldogs. Harvard beat Penn.
Yep.
It'll be on WBOS 92.9. Good morning. Yale at Harvard this weekend.
The game.
Look for Paul Sweeney, section 31.
Exactly.
Rob, you're probably not sitting next to Reese Witherspoon.
Oh, of course.
I would think so.
Okay. That'd be solid.
Like that would be solid. Red and green on a screen to VIX shows the tension out there. We've gone from a 14.13 at VIX up to 16.49 on YouTube podcasts, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a little bit of red and green on the screen, and this is ahead of a new trading week. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.4%, 81 points. Dow futures, little change, down about 38 points. S&P futures up 0.1%, or about 6 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.31%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.47%, and that's up 2 basis points. To currencies, we have the dollar stronger. We have the Japanese yen right now weaker. We have the euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up more than 1.5% at around 90,000. To commodities, Brent crude higher at $71 a barrel. WTI crude $67 a barrel. Spot gold up more than 1% at $2,596 an ounce. Checking back in with Tesla shares, they're up about 6%. Speculation President-elect Donald Trump's team will ease those self-driving rules. And MicroStrategy's decision to hold Bitcoin instead of cash on its books, well, it's paid off. Has a new cachet valued at $26 billion. And finally, Netflix says about 65 million people watched the boxing match between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson on Friday, but a lot of viewers complained about the buffering issues. I was one of them, so it's going to lead to some questions.
You watched this
Yeah,
thing?
I did, because I wanted to see the women's fight. That was the big draw. That was a good fight.
Oh, I didn't know this about you.
The Tyson fight was just
But
Horrible.
seriously, this folds into
But
the
buffering.
NFL.
Yes.
Yep.
So what does it mean
Can
for
they
the
do
future?
the NFL, Paul?
Not right now. They can't. No. I mean, the NFL's not going to take that type of.
They're going to go mental if they have
totally,
buffering issues.
Yes. It was. You had to jump off, then you had to sign
So
back in. It was
did
very
you
annoying.
not see The Rock in his Christmas movie
Because I was
you
watching
spent
the
all
fight?
the money on Tyson and the other guy?
Yes.
Now, is this Mr. Mateo or you driving the
Oh,
bus?
no,
here?
she's driving the bus.
I,
Oh, no.
I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the women's fight. I'm
Okay.
a fan of the Serrano, Amanda Serrano. I'm a big
Great.
fan. So yes.
Gura's going,
Did
I
not
waited
see that
for
coming.
this.
Yeah, exactly.
Lisa, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. We're brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading derivatives marketplace, offering the widest range of global benchmark products across all major asset classes. CME Group, where risk meets opportunity. CME Group, where risk meets opportunity. We thank CME Group for their attention as well. Joining us now from Rio, from the Copacabana Beach, and he's not at the Copacabana Palace. He's at some boutique thing with a balcony and,
Well, that's how, I mean,
it's the way he rolls.
Yep.
David Gura joins us right now from the G20 meetings. David, I have the recollection of a G20 meeting in Pittsburgh. You didn't cover that because there wasn't a beach. There was a Pittsburgh G20 meeting with President Obama years ago that had substance. Will this G20 frolic have substance?
Well, there's plenty on the agenda, Tom. A lot of talk about climate and development financing and things that you'd find at any number of G20 summits in the past. But the real action at this one is on the sidelines where these one-on-one meetings are happening among world leaders. And of course, President Biden is here on the heels of his trip to Peru for the APEC summit. He's on this kind of swan song trip through South America, taking stock of what he's accomplished so far, but also reckoning with the fact, as you know, that his days are numbered as president. He's got fewer than 2 months left, and he's trying to offer some assurance to those other world leaders as they kind of look to each other and wonder about what the future is going to bring.
In the photo op, are they going to line President Biden up under U for United States next to Vietnam, or does he stand in the front row as President Trump would assist?
Well, you're hitting on something really crucial here. We make fun of these photo ops, but so much goes into them about who's standing where and who's next to whom. At this one, there's an element of awkwardness because the G20 includes not just U.S. allies, but adversaries as well. The Russian President Vladimir Putin isn't here. Sergei Lavrov, his foreign minister, is. And the way that they're getting around any awkwardness about President Biden's placement vis-a-vis Mr. Lavrov or any others is they're going to do this photo op at kind of a broader development conversation that's going to take place earlier. So they're not going to have like a standard 20 leaders next to each other. It's going to be a wider group of people who are invited to that photograph. So something different about this summit as well.
Paul, I've stood 20 feet, not even 20, 15 feet from the IMF photo op, and you'd think it was like your high school photo.
That's right.
Why do the football players have to, come forward? It's
Exactly.
crazy.
Hey, David, to what extent, if any, does President-elect Trump loom over this G20?
Huge. I mean, I don't know that everyone's talking about him in specific, but everybody's wondering what's going to happen. Tom brings up that summit that took place in Pittsburgh at the tail end of President Obama's tenure in the White House. When he was leaving and Donald Trump was coming in, there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions among world leaders about what the next 4 years would hold. They didn't know how Donald Trump was going to lead or what his relationship was going to be like with other countries or these multilateral institutions. Something else that's different about this summit is people know what Donald Trump is like and how he governs. And so I was kind of counseled going into this summit by Ben Rhodes, who is an advisor to President Obama. Don't look at how they're thinking about their relationship with Donald Trump. They largely have that figured out, and it may be variation on a theme slightly different than it was back in 2016. What's more interesting and more important is to look at their relationship to China. And so walking around here in Rio and Brazil, you see the influence that Brazil has on this country, on Latin America broadly, the inroads that China has made. We're seeing just a real shift in the winds here, and I think that you see that kind of in stark relief as the summit gets underway, Paul. Just the role that China's playing, the number of meetings that President Xi is expected to have with other world leaders, and how few relative to that President Biden's going to have.
Interesting. So what is the extent there of the interaction between, on the sidelines there, we're seeing some reporting between Xi and President Biden here?
So they had a meeting over the weekend in Peru at that APEC summit, and it was a moment for them to talk for 2 hours. They hadn't spoken since April, and that was a telephone conversation. So widely agreed this is the last time they're going to talk while Joe Biden is in the White House. And again, it was a moment for President Biden to acknowledge the fact that the relationship is markedly better than the one that he inherited. They do talk with some frequency, even if it's not regularly. The lines of communication are open between Washington and Beijing. But I mentioned President Xi being here. You have a lot of new faces who are just trying to introduce themselves to other folks. Keir Starmer's here, and that was the first meeting on his agenda this morning, was with President Xi, and that in itself is revelatory. You haven't had a prime minister sitting down with the Chinese premier since 2018 when Theresa May did it. So a reset of that relationship on that side as well.
David, Rio report, please. Were you at the Bottega Savata last night, neighborhood bar seat 6, or did you hold court at the Belmont Copacabana Palace?
Look, I've walked by the palace. I'm angling to get a caipirinha there a little later today, but I will say the food has been extremely good. The seafood very fresh. There was octopus on the menu last night. I availed myself of that. And I mentioned that the caipirinhas, the cachaça, the cane liquor involved in those, extremely smooth, and I enjoyed a beverage or two of my choice last night, Tom.
I'm on an island off Mexico 1,000,000 years ago, and they're playing Fleetwood Mac. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's un-American. Do they play Barry Manilow's Copacabana in Rio? Tell me they don't.
I've heard some João Gilberto, but not Barry Manilow yet. I will lend an ear to it tonight. As you can see behind me, the famous Copacabana beach. Music is playing constantly throughout the day. I've wandered a little bit around, hope to get into the water. The sun rises at 5 a.m. here, which is such a relief. I'm hoping to take a pre-surveillance dip tomorrow, Tom, and I'll report back on that.
There we go. David Gura with team coverage from Copacabana Beach Radio. For those, Rio, for those of you on radio, not seeing Rio, what a view. I mean, it makes
he's got a
France
phenomenal
look
shot. I mean, but he hasn't seen a ray of sunlight in his lifetime, I don't think. The guy's got no color. I guess
he's like a Washington nerd.
He is. He's a Washington nerd. He's,
He'll probably get in the water. He can,
Brooklyn.
Maybe he'll take the tram up to the Rock and all that.
Lisa,
have you been to Rio?
I have not, but I've always wanted to.
I've always wanted to go. I was scheduled once or twice to go, and
Surveillance road trip.
Yes.
It's a long ways away.
That's okay.
It's like south.
Yeah.
And it's not
82 degrees and sunny there today. Wow. I just kind of Googled it. So they're good.
Well, they're under the equator, tell me, right? Yeah. This is how ignorant I am.
Well, they're going into their summer, I think.
Yeah, they're in. Yeah, okay.
That whole southern.
Team coverage, David Gura there.
We're on top of it.
And with President Biden there with his really final soiree, worth reporting on to say.
But his reporting about the influence of China in South America was really interesting to me. David,
huge.
They've clearly been investing there for decades, and it's interesting to see the sway that President Xi has in that part of the world.
I could just see Gura walking the beach. Her name was Lola. She was a showgirl with yellow feathers in her hair and a dress cut down to there. Stay with us with David Gura in Rio. Much more across all of YouTube and your morning commute. Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We welcome you on your morning commute, 92.9 FM, Boston. Thank you for the hospitality. Susan Collins and the people killed it at the Boston Fed.
Yeah, that was
It was
fun.
enjoyable.
Yep, absolutely.
You know,
Great town.
We escape out of Boston. We got back. Great commute. Paul, does the Gulf Stream, like, what do? You get over, like, you know, New Haven, Connecticut, and you begin landing, right?
Sure,
It's
exactly.
like up and down 28
you
minutes.
barely got a cocktail, in
Yeah.
your hand, and then it's time to.
Oh, I did
time to
not have a
land.
cocktail. I took the shuttle, and they don't do that.
Okay.
Kind of thing there. We're here on a Monday morning. It's Reset Monday. We're looking here. Damian Sassauer just walked in and said, Tom, the 10-year real yield. That's what I looked at this morning. We'll start with that with Damian here in a moment. Let's get right to it. Bloomberg Surveillance. We're brought to you by Cohn-Resnick Advisory Assurance. Tax, is your business future ready? Talk to Cohn-Resnick's digital advisory team about strategies, about platforms to drive competitive advantage. And we thank Cohn-Resnick for their original commitment to what we do here at Bloomberg Surveillance. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Out on YouTube Podcast. That's how Damian Sassauer listens to us in a commute across the nation. I'm seeing lots of Apple CarPlay.
Yeah, all
I'm
over,
seeing
yeah.
more. I don't have it in the Nash Rambler.
What's taken over my car basically runs everything in my
Yeah,
vehicle.
we'll have to see. From the Interactive Broker Studios, you need a Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And we got markets struggling for direction right now. Futures mixed. NASDAQ futures leading the gains right now up about 0.2%. And a big part of that is Tesla shares. They're up about 6%. Sources saying President-elect Donald Trump's team looking to encourage the development of fully self-driving vehicles. From NASDAQ futures, we go to Dow futures, down 0.1%, down 62 points. S&P futures, little changed, up about 3 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.33%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.48%, and that's up 3 basis points. To currencies, the dollar, a little changed. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index right now, little changed after reaching that 2-year high last week. The Japanese yen is down about 0.6% and 155.33 against the dollar, and that's after the Bank of Japan governor avoided saying that he's going to raise interest rates at that December meeting. Bitcoin recovered from its biggest 2-day retreat since the U.S. vote, moving past the 90,000 mark. It's now up more than 1% at 90,360. And finally, shares of Nvidia, they're falling down 2%. The information reported the company is asking suppliers to change the design of those server racks for its new Blackwell GPUs due to an overheating problem. So that's sparking some worries about delays. And another company making news, that's Spirit Airlines, filed for bankruptcy in New York, listing assets and liabilities between $1 billion and $10 billion. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Joining us now, driving all of EM here at Bloomberg, Damian Sassauer joins us. Damian, we got to talk about important things like the euro as an emerging market currency. But I got it. You were in Rio, like what, 2 Caparinas ago?
Yeah, no, earlier in early October. So I was in Rio for a few days. I was in Sao Paulo for the balance of the week.
Right.
We
Slummed it to
visiting
Sao Paulo.
clients. Yeah. Oh no, I mean we were actually the forward team because Mike Bloomberg was there for COP20. Like I think the next week for some climate event.
Right.
So yeah, Eric Schatzker was there. It was great. We had the whole team down there. We were kicking
you didn't
tires.
mention Paul Sweeney or Tom Keene.
No, you guys are in Boston. You guys love Boston. Come on.
Yeah, we do. It's great.
You guys are great on Friday. That was fun.
What's the Brazilian economy like? The backdrop here of Gura at the Belmont Copacabana Palace. You slummed it at the Fairmont on Copacabana, but that's great. That's
the Hamachi
tourism.
Yellowtail at Sushi Leblon was very inexpensive, and it was delicious, Tom. It was.
That's
That's what you're
what
asking.
Gura
And this is
said.
a shout out
That's
to
what Gura
Arthur
said.
Burns of Deltec. He is the definitive voice on Brazil and Latin America. This is Mike Milken's guy, his go-to guy for emerging markets. He recommended Sushi Leblon, and it did not fail to
Killed
deliver.
it. Thank you
Killed
for the
it.
tour guide.
Killed
What's the Brazilian economy like under Lula?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're asking us the same question. When are you guys going to like the real again? I mean, this is becoming really for every emerging market central bank. And let's go to the real yield here in the U.S. Let's go to growth and inflation
2.13%.
How that's spilling off into the broader emerging market complex, I'll tell you, it's not an even flow. You're seeing inflation actually picking up and accelerating in quite a few markets, including Brazil, where, I mean, the forward markets are pricing in 300 basis points of tightening over the next year, Tom. That's a lot of, a lot of inflation the markets are projecting there. But then you've got, others like Colombia, Indonesia, South Africa, and Korea, where you still have inflation at cycle lows. So the question is this divergence, and what are central banks willing to do? We're going to get a little taste of that this week because the SARB, the South African Reserve Bank, is going to meet this week, of course.
It's on my calendar.
They are one of those central banks that has been cutting. They're expected to cut again, but their currency's starting to weaken off the back of this election, and we're going to see if they can hold true to form, I guess. So look, I mean, it's inflation expectations rising, growth expectations rising in the U.S., and the uneven sort of impact on emerging markets and, quite frankly, the rest of the G7.
So we got the Bloomberg. I'm just looking at the Bloomberg Dollar Index up over 5% just since late September.
Yep.
I mean, that seems like a huge move to me. What's that mean for your world?
Well, let's talk about what it means for global fixed income. More than 50% of the Bloomberg Global Aggregate Bond Index is non-dollar denominated debt. So now you've got the Bloomberg Global Ag, Paul, down 1.2% this year. Let's remember, it rebounded 5.7% last year, but in 22, down 16%. In 21, down 4.7%. I mean, bonds are not working again. And this is a problem if you're a 60-40 or a balanced investor. And I think you got to pay mind to that. But let me just slip in there that emerging market dollar credit is up 6.5% year to date. So.
Dave and Sess are all lathered up here. I want to get to the president-elect. Everything tells me there's a point. I say this with respect to his belief and Mr. Lighthizer belief. Donald Trump needs a weak dollar. How does he affect that?
Yeah. He does need a weak dollar in order to pay for all this, but there are a bunch of different ways you can basically try to grow your way out of it, which, look, the U.S., if you look at growth expectations, is attempting to do, but I agree with you. I think they need a weak dollar, but don't pull on that string very tightly, Tom, because the market has a funny way. I mean, we are a free-floating currency here in the U.S., right? So the market has kind of a funny way of pulling on that thread and seeing what's underneath the kimono. So I wouldn't at all be sort of betting that Trump wants a weaker dollar and he's going to get a weaker dollar. I don't necessarily agree with that. But look, I mean, look at yuan. Yuan up 2.1%. What's interesting, though, is you look at some of these other economies like Korea, South Korea, and Mexico, which are sort of leveraged to the whole tariff Trump 101 trade. They initially came off, but they've actually kind of stabilized here. I mean, they're a little bit weaker, maybe like 1.5% since the election. But, those are two currencies that should be in everyone's sort of right in focus for everyone, right in everyone's crosshairs, because they should do poorly in the Trump administration.
So for emerging markets, what's the value trade out there? If I don't want to get
gold.
Caught in gold, yeah, exactly. If I don't want to get caught in a value trap, is there someplace I can go?
Interestingly enough, I would say the best hideout in emerging markets has, quite frankly, been emerging market investment grade dollar credit or EM dollar credit writ large, because high yield's just done fantastically well. I still don't think that high yield is going to hold on to a lot of those gains. I mean, spreads have come in quite considerably, and there's some fundamental issues underneath the surface there. But, EM local debt now is negative again on the year. We're down 1.5%. You can't hide from a stronger dollar, Paul, as you rightly point out. And the runway, I mean, with, again, Euro US at 105. I mean, 102 is well within sight. And, I mean, a lot of people are talking parity, and I've just put out a great research piece talking about the beta between EMFX and the euro, and it is strong and strengthening. And so look to the euro for color on when EMFX is going to go next.
So are you saying your vector's weaker euro and euro could break parity?
102 is more the level I'm looking at, which is a 5% decline since the election. I don't think parity, I don't want to go calling for parity because that's a psychological, a technical
level.
Come on,
I got to create some excitement.
I mean, now 102 is enough excitement for one day. I mean, Tom, come on. I mean, look, I think, again, if you look at just kind of what's going on in commodities, and you now have the Bloomberg Commodity Index flat on the year. This is an index that was up 7-8% just a few months back. You see energy, you see base metals flat on the year. Energy's on its, it's on crude oil's not doing well. So, yeah, I mean, look, these are all flowing through into the currency story, into the fundamental economic story for emerging markets, and can't be ignored.
Miami lost to Georgia Tech.
That was a few weeks ago. I thought we were gonna.
Well, I got to stagger forward to
push
Wake
past
Forest.
that. I think they still got a very decent shot of certainly making it to the playoffs and the college football playoffs. I'm talking, and making a run there. But I mean, Oregon, man, and then Indiana. Did Indiana win again?
They did.
They're still undefeated, and is Army still undefeated?
Yes, they are.
The Black Knights.
So
wow.
they got Notre Dame and Army this week.
Don't they have to place Army above 5, 6, 8 other teams?
You would think. I mean, the Black Knights are in business.
Well, they're playing Notre
shout
Dame.
out to
They're
Luke
playing
Marino.
Notre Dame.
He's a pitcher for the baseball team. An Army. I mean, he's got a hell of an army. He's a sophomore over there. We're going to be keeping close watch of him. Luke Marino.
How come Gura and Sass are in Rio and we're not? What's wrong with this picture?
Why not together is the real question.
That's a true road trip. Damien Sassar, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated driving all of you in here. Every time he's here, it's like a jumble. I don't know. There's like 6 or 7 ideas, and
all I know, I'm going out there buying like Lebanese sovereign debt or something when he walks out.
Well, he hasn't called for that yet as well. We'll have to see. Please stay with us with our news in New York City. John Tucker.
All right, thanks, guys. The selection process for President-elect Trump's Treasury Secretary appears to have fallen into disarray. Bloomberg's Laura Davison has the latest from Washington.
The discussions, instead of getting narrower, have been getting more expansive. Trump has been frustrated by some of the jockeying that we've seen between some of the who were the leading contenders last week, folks like Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, and he's asked his advisors to, present some other alternatives. So we've seen other folks like Bill Hagerty, Senator Bill Hagerty, come into the mix, Apollo CEO Mark Rowan. And some of these other names, as Trump is trying to figure out, who he wants to come to the fore.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison reporting Trump has tried to move quickly on his other cabinet choices. It's now unclear when he'll make a decision on Treasury. Chinese leader Xi Jinping used his final meeting with President Biden to send a clear message to Donald Trump. China wants to be friends, but's ready for a fight if necessary. They met during the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Lima, Peru over the weekend. And Bloomberg's executive editor for Greater China, John Liu, says Xi outlined 4 red lines in China's relationship with the U.S. that are targeted at Trump.
One, that the U.S. should not seek to contest the Communist Party's grip on power in China, that the United States should not try to push China to become a democracy, that the United States should not try to contain China's economic rise. And lastly, and probably most importantly, that the United States should not support Taiwanese independence. And so it did seem President Xi, ahead of a new Trump administration, trying to put some guardrails, bumpers around where this relationship could go.
Bloomberg's John Liu adds that President-elect Trump has tapped several hardliners on China to lead his foreign policy team. Well, the U.S. allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles to strike inside Russia, a Kremlin spokesman is calling it an escalation as Ukraine's allies look for new ways to bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. And national average gasoline prices set to fall below $3 a gallon just in time for Thanksgiving, when holiday travel is expected to climb back to pre-pandemic levels. The national average retail fuel price already has fallen to the lowest since January. Global news 24 hours a day, and whatever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Tom and Paul.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Paul, with your vista of being underwater, has the weather ever been like this?
No, and quite frankly, the drought we have in this part of the Northeast is really serious because we haven't had rain, Tom. None in September, none in October, none to speak of in November. Maybe a little bit this week, but yeah, it's a problem. It's kind of.
I see the smoke from the New Jersey, New York, northern New Jersey border.
I saw that
and
flying
it comes
in on Friday.
Right down.
Yep.
Right down. I don't know how far it comes down.
It's kind of what our friends out west deal with all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're starting to deal with it just a little bit here. And it's very unusual for this part of the world.
Do you still see like dolphins out there?
Yeah.
Really, this time of year?
I've never seen more fishing boats out on the water than yesterday, even more than like summer.
Yeah.
The fish are running.
And when they jump out of the water, they go, help, help.
That's John Tucker. That's up at Sandy Hook. That's
John Tucker.
Where the fish speak to him.
Wild Kingdom with John Tucker. We say good morning to all of you on your morning commute. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have little movement in futures. This is as traders await some fresh direction on growth, also the path of interest rates. Housing actually leads this week's economic data. Today, the National Association of Home Builders reports on November builder confidence. Tomorrow, it's the government's read on housing starts. Thursday, it's October home resales. NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 30 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 72 points. S&P futures little change, down about a point. We have the 2-year yield 4.32%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.47%. That's up 3 basis points. To commodities, gold rose more than 1%, and this is after Goldman Sachs analysts predicted it could hit a record $3,000 an ounce by the end of next year. Right now, we have spot gold at $2,597 an ounce. Oil, we have Brent crude $71 a barrel, WTI crude $67 a barrel. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index right now about little change. We have the Japanese yen weaker, and Bitcoin right now up about 0.8%, around 89,000. Companies making news. It's HSBC reportedly asked managers to reapply for their jobs in the firm's new corporate and institutional banking division. Now, sources are saying several hundred managing directors, other senior bankers will be let go in the coming weeks. And Wall Street Journal reporting CVS Health adding 4 new members to its board in its agreement with Glenview Capital Management. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul, I look at the, it's not sophisticated, folks. I look at the DES screen, which is a classic description screen. And then there's a quote that Paul taught me, BQ, where I get 4 ratios quickly. Tesla, PE, 131. And then I come over and I'm looking, come on, the gerbil's slow today. I mean, it was quite a weekend. Price to cash flow, 71. Total enterprise value to EBITDA, which is a fancy CFA ratio, 80. It's at 10.5 times sales. I just don't get it. Dan Ives thinks this is the second coming.
Of course. I mean, you don't have to get it. You just have to buy it and own it. That's what the play is there.
That's the play.
That's the play.
I just don't.
I know.
It's Greek to me.
Well, Matt Winkler, he bought one of the first.
Matt's way ahead. Yeah,
exactly. He was way ahead of this stuff.
I like their Uber.
Yeah.
I considered it. I could get in.
I don't know how to open the door though.
I can't open the door. In or out. I
Yeah.
can't figure out how to open the door.
Yep.
Drives me nuts. The window doesn't go down all the way.
Okay.
I hate that.
Sure.
It must be a law. I'm sure there's some regulation.
No, it's just because the door.
Adam Farstrap is saying, I got up for this.
Exactly.
Why didn't you bring in the gentleman from Schroders?
Adam Farstrup, he is the head of multi-asset for North America for Schroders. Adam, as you step back here, post-election, did you and your multi-asset team, did you guys change the way you look at markets broadly and your discussion with your clients?
So I think the key call was pre-election not being short the equity markets, and particularly the U.S. equity market. You saw a lot of people really concerned about what was going to happen with risk. They were concerned about the outcome of the election. It was really about looking through to the strength of the U.S. economy and what Fed policy was going to be going forward.
All right, so given that, we've got a Fed we've got an administration presumably that will be pro-business, lower taxes, all those wonderful things. We've got a Fed that's presumably on this path of lowering rates. So what does that mean for your outlook? What are you guys calling for right now?
So we're calling for a continuation of the U.S. exceptionalism. So we saw strong growth regardless of the outcome of the election. Clearly, the Trump administration policies of deregulation, of extending corporate tax cuts, we think that's going to further boost growth in the U.S. Outside the U.S., the picture is a lot more mixed. We see a lot of concerns around Europe. Inside the U.S., again, when you think about Fed policy, we think the market is finally coming around to our view that the Fed may not be able to cut as much as they think.
So, again, multi-asset, one of the multi-assets that's big in this market that wasn't really big even 10 or 15 years ago is private credit. How do you guys think about that when you think about the various asset classes you can invest in?
Sure. Well, for our particular portfolios, we're focused on liquid markets. So we're looking at the public credit markets. In private credit, there's clearly opportunities. I think you have to be very discerning within private credit because that means a lot of different things. So the consumer end of the private credit markets, that looks very strong to us. The credit quality of consumer balance sheets in the US is very strong. At the other end, you start thinking about leveraged loans or high yield. We think the fundamentals for corporates in the US are very, very strong, but understanding, where are the spreads at, how much you actually getting paid to take on that corporate risk.
Schroeder's back to 1804. I'm sorry, Bloomberg data doesn't go back to 1804 except for Bitcoin. Adam, I look at the Ibbotson chart. I run Standard & Poor's 500 log. I take it from the Guadalcanal low, 1942, worst moment in American history. We're extended. We're out one standard deviation, but we're nowhere near the 2.5 standard deviation 1999 excess.
Yeah.
Talk to the worry warts about OMG 99 2000 collapse 2001.
So I think the first and most important thing is if you look at the Mag 7 or even the Mag 6, if you want to exclude your Tesla example here, the earnings for the Mag 6 have actually been very strong. So there's a big difference between the end of the 90s where we were talking on sort of price to clicks and random things like this. We have a massive CapEx cycle. It's not just AI, it's also the cloud. Remember, you talk to some of these large tech companies, they'll tell you there's still 70% of compute power to go onto the cloud, and that has to happen in this world of AI, where you're moving all of the location of this computing power. So that's the top end of the market. The bottom end of the market, you think about financials, you think about small cap stocks. There are parts of this market where the valuations are not particularly demanding that will be supported by the economic growth.
Do you buy into this whole AI trade here? I can't even define it at a cocktail party, but yeah. I'll say I'm investing in it. How do you guys think about it?
So we think there is a fundamental transformation happening within businesses around particularly generative AI, large language models. The big question, of course, is who's going to benefit from that? So I think the Nvidia trade may be getting a bit long in the tooth right now, starting to understand which companies can actually utilize this to drive productivity growth will be the next phase of this trade.
Lisa, my 20-year-old opened up a Fidelity account and bought $149 worth of Nvidia.
Really?
Yeah, he told me
like yesterday?
Like a couple of days ago. His brother is the rep for this said financial institution. So
they just open their laptop and start buying.
I don't know what's going on.
Come over and talk to yours?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. So if a 20-year-old knucklehead in Santa Clara University is buying Nvidia, that's got to be the top of the market. What's the theme? What's the theme that you and your team go out with these days? Because I mean, a lot of investors want to step back from the noise, elections and earnings and all that kind of. And so, what's the big theme here? Is it AI? Is it tech? What are you talking about?
I actually think it's about portfolio resilience. So you think about this era of disruption we're in, whether you talk about potentially positive disruption like AI, you look at politics around the world, you look at geopolitics, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty out there. It's hard to call equities cheap right here, even though we think this is a good source of return. So we're thinking about how do you add that source of resilience? The correlation behind bonds has been shifting, so how they move between equities and bonds, we're worried about that. So you can buy bonds for the yield, but you need to think about gold, you need to think about other sources of diversification in your portfolios to help deal with these disruptions that are coming.
I look at where we are in people resetting for next year. You're saying basically steady as she goes. What do you say to people scared stiff in cash? What is the process or method to begin to participate, whether we're in the third inning, the seventh inning of a great bull market?
Well, I think if you're really nervous, the first step is moving out into bonds, because now you've seen the yield curve flatten. So the spread between the 10-year government bond, that sort of negative yield spread between the 10-year government bond and cash, is so much less from here. So I think you actually get paid to move out the yield curve. But more importantly, we think the source of returns continues to be equities. We think there are opportunities outside the U.S. So even though the European economy is weak, you look at some of these companies, particularly outside of Germany and France, there's some great opportunities.
Don't be a stranger. I got 8 more questions, including the transatlantic, the special relationship between Schroeder's and Bloomberg Surveillance. Special relationship. Adam, thank you. Adam Farstrup with us, head of multi-asset North America for Schroders, and something we're hearing from many people, which is America first, and the exceptionalism here forward. We will see. Futures at -8.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got futures mixed with President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Treasury Secretary in focus this week, along with Nvidia earnings. That takes place on Wednesday. NASDAQ futures up a little change, up about 13 points. Dow futures up down 0.2%, 109 points. S&P futures down about 0.1% or 6 points. And Morgan Stanley's Michael Wilson, well, he's turning bullish. He says he sees the S&P 500 ending 2025 at 6,500. The bond market, the 2-year yield, 4.32%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.48%, and that's up about 4 basis points. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We have the Japanese yen weaker, euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up about 0.6% at around 89,000. And speaking of Bitcoin, MicroStrategy, it's bought about $4.6 billion of Bitcoin. That's its largest purchase yet. Now, we mentioned Nvidia earnings. Let's go there. Shares down nearly 3%. That's due to some worries about delays after a report from the Information about the company asking suppliers to redesign those server racks for its Blackwell GPUs. And finally, shares of server maker Super Microcomputer, they're up 13%, approaching a deadline to either file a delayed 10K annual report or submit a plan to file the form to NASDAQ in order to remain listed. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. Right now, I'm going to tangent. Paul's got some ideas, but I'm going to tangent to tariffs and all that. Eric Winograd joins us. Let me do this first and tell you that our economic indicators at the 8:30 hour, busy economic week coming up. Our economic indicators brought to you by IBKR with Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. Eric Winograd with us out of the shop at Dartmouth and at NITSE with Alliance Bernstein. We can talk about the greater economy, but there's such a heritage, Eric Winograd, at Dartmouth, led by Douglas Irwin's work, of looking at trade. It goes back 30, 40, 50 years. Take Dartmouth Econ 101 and bring it over to tariffs. What would you tell President-elect Trump?
So I think what I would tell any policymaker who's thinking about tariffs is that what they tend to generate is less efficient growth, right? You're trying to incentivize the production of something in one place instead of another. There's usually a reason you're producing it in the other place first, which is that they have a comparative advantage in that. And so trying to produce something that we do less efficiently than someone else does it isn't a recipe for a smooth economy. Right. It isn't a recipe for an efficient economy.
Do you discern that magnitude matters, that if we do sort of kind of like tariffs, that's way different than really doing heavy, almost 1920s tariffs?
Oh, absolutely. Magnitude makes a big difference, right? You could do something that is symbolic and it makes almost no difference at all. You could do something that's much more meaningful and it could have very significant and even nonlinear effects. In terms of the policy mix that President-elect Trump has talked about, the across-the-board tariffs have the potential to be very disruptive. Whereas if you were to apply tariffs on selected industries subject to certain conditions, it probably wouldn't make a very big difference.
Eric, I'm reading your notes on the deficits, and I've learned so much just in the last 2 minutes reading your notes here. But my takeaway is there's no fix here. There really is no fix. Explain the math there.
Yeah, look, the math, we're running already very large deficits, right? 6.5% give or take of GDP, which is almost unprecedented outside of a war or a recession. The way to fix a deficit is essentially political. And because the things that are required to do that, you either have to raise taxes or you have to cut spending. Both of those are very unpopular, given what the government actually spends its money on and given everyone's reluctance to pay taxes. Because it is so unpopular, the only way it can really happen is if the two parties work together so that they both own it. Right? Neither one party wants to own deficit correction because if they do that, they'll lose the next election badly. So they have to work together to own it. And in the current environment, they don't work together very well. So that leaves us sort of where we are, which is the question with the deficit is, will it be big or will it be bigger?
And it's probably unfair to blame the politicians for not having the political will to fix the deficit because voters don't seem to want to fix the deficits. No. So I don't know where you go from here.
Yeah, look, the American people, whether they intend to or not, have systematically voted for larger deficits. Think of it this way. I'm going to start listing policy proposals. You tell me when I get to one that you think will win an election. Raising taxes, cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare, cutting Medicaid, cutting funding for education. None of these are things that people are willing to vote for.
Well, the Senate, this comes back to our conversation, folks, with Henrietta Treyz, which is process of Senate and House, from where Alliance Bernstein sits, Eric Winograd. Is there great uncertainty now, or do you think our institutions can provide checks and balances?
Of course, there's great uncertainty. And, anytime you come out of a wave election, if you will, where one party has unfettered control, the possibility for large policy change is greater than if you have some sort of divided government. That's, I think, part of the reason that markets have historically preferred divided government, not because they have a preference necessarily for one policy or another, but because they have a preference for stability. So when you enter into an environment when one party does have the capacity to enact change, and particularly when it's under the leadership of someone like President-elect Trump, who hasn't been as consistent in his policy prescriptions as perhaps a more traditional politician would have been, right. That uncertainty makes it very difficult for markets.
We just talked to Damian Sassower. He's focused from EM at Bloomberg on the U.S. 10-year real yield. I'm sorry, it's lifting 2.13% right now. Is that something, Eric, that provides a tip point that dampens real GDP? Or is it something financial and discrete away from your watch?
Well, certainly, I think that would feed into the way we would think about financial conditions, right? The way that monetary policy transmits to the broader economy. You would look at bond yields, both nominal and real. You would look at equity prices. You would look at the currency value, and you would look at credit spreads. And you sort of take all those together, and it gives you an indication of how easy it is or how expensive it is for economic actors to access funding. And the higher the yields go, the wider that spreads are, the more challenging it is for businesses to fund future investment, to fund future hiring. So yeah, that's a part of what we're looking at. But it is only part of it, right? Rising equity valuations help too, because businesses can issue additional, can access additional funding that way. Credit spreads are still very narrow. So, I would observe that higher yields, both nominal and real, matter. But I think you want to look at a broader set of indicators and not just that one.
So what are you guys at Alliance Bernstein saying about this U.S. economy here? It seems like corporate earnings are pretty solid. It seems like the Fed is, kind of committed to cutting rates here. Is that a decent backdrop for a decent economy over the next, 6, 12 months?
It is, and the way we're thinking about it, given the policy uncertainty, is what we're trying to do is set out a baseline scenario and say that, in general, if nothing else changes, this is how things are likely to play out. And as you say, it's a pretty benign backdrop. You have earnings that look solid, a labor market that looks solid. Things look pretty good. Inflation coming down, a central bank cutting rates at one pace or another. We set that out as a baseline, not because we have high confidence that that's exactly how things will play out, but because that allows us as investors to adjust as information changes. So you have your baseline, and then you say, okay, well, what if tariffs are imposed? Well, we can look at our baseline and see how the tariffs, depending on what size they are, would impact that. And I think that's the best anyone can do in this environment. It isn't an environment that pays for people to take, heroic bets on where we think things are going to be from a policy perspective, because we just don't know that yet.
Eric, thank you. Eric Winograd, Chief Economist, AllianceBernstein, with us with a brief. And, Paul, this is the first moment I've actually thought about this. How do you write the year-end, year-forward 30-page brief?
Yeah.
I mean, they're due now. I mean, we're going to start seeing them in droves.
Exactly. And I guess you just
What do you do, rewrite it?
Yeah, exactly. Have to rewrite it after the election. So we'll have to see what we get out of our friends on Wall Street.
And the key economic data, I mean, I don't want to hurry the month here. What are you doing for Thanksgiving?
Working. Day before, day after.
Really?
Yes.
This is because of all your summer. He took off the entire...
Whoa.
Get out the surveillance violin.
Exactly.
What'd you take, like 14 weekends in a row
14
off?
Fridays in a row, exactly. That's how I roll. And it's also I can work the day after Thanksgiving, so you folks can have the day off.
And also Christmas week, aren't you?
All Christmas week, too.
Look at that.
Yeah. That's how it's a quid pro quo.
People saying he's falling on his sword. 14 weeks in a row.
Exactly.
It really works out because Paul loves the summer, and I just take it off at the end of the year. I really don't want to take any days off. Mrs. Keene says I have to.
You have to.
I mean, like Tucker. Sean, when did you last have a day off?
Oh, please.
2006? 7?
It just seems that way.
First Trump administration.
He's
coming up on 31 years, by the way.
There you go.
Really?
Yeah.
My word. You were here before Mr. Bloomberg.
Yeah, what a week. Exactly.
I turned the lights on.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Red and green on the screen with our news in New York. Here is John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, the debate over who President-elect Trump will select as his Treasury Secretary spiraled into uncertainty this weekend. Sources are saying Elon Musk spoke to potential pick Scott Bessent after already publicly endorsing another candidate, Howard Lutnick. And Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta says the Trump transition team isn't any closer to making the selection and is considering alternatives.
The former trade representative Lighthizer being considered as well. Even Mark Rowan, the CEO of Apollo, and a senator from Tennessee, Bill Hagerty, also in the mix, or names at least that have been floated. We thought we were getting closer, and now it feels less so.
Well, the Treasury Secretary oversees the $28 trillion Treasuries market as well as economic sanctions. President Biden gave Ukraine the green light to use Western-made missiles for long-range strikes on Russian territory. The shift in policy thought to be motivated by North Korean troops appearing on the battlefield. And speaking through an interpreter, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says any strikes on Russia would not be telegraphed in advance.
План посилення України – це план перемоги.
Today, there's a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions. But strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves.
Ukraine's President Zelensky speaking after a massive Russian aerial attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The G-20 summit getting underway today in Rio de Janeiro. It follows President Biden's last face-to-face meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, Xi using the encounter to spell out his approach to President-elect Trump. And just a week after winning a majority of the vote in several of the nation's largest Arab-majority cities, President-elect Donald Trump has filled top administration posts with staunch Israel supporters, including an ambassador to Israel who has claimed there is no such thing as Palestinians. These selections have prompted mixed reactions among Arab Americans and Muslims in Michigan, which went for Trump along with all 6 other battleground states. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Paul, Lisa, Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. We're brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading derivatives marketplace offering the widest range of global benchmark products across all major asset classes. CME Group, where risk meets opportunity. Thank you, CME. I visited them once in Chicago.
Yeah.
It was a cold day. It was
Yeah.
windy. That's
Well,
what I remember.
there you go.
You know.
That happens out there.
What do we see on the screen, Paul? I'm looking at the 10-year real yield. What are you looking at?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, let's go to the yield space, Tom. We've got a little bit of stability out there in the bond market. The 10-year Treasury just up a couple of basis points, 4.46%, kind of in that trading range. The 2 years at 4.31%. That's pretty steady here. So we'll keep an eye on that, but that's been kind of the trading range. Alex Steele coming back here today, so I'm going to quote WTI crude oil. She's our oil expert, energy expert. Pretty steady here, but it's $67 a barrel. $2.70 I filled up the Beamer this weekend
that sounds
per gallon.
about right.
So it's pretty solid.
Where's the
I was pretty
Wawa?
happy with that.
Yeah, about 270-ish, something like that.
I mean, people are.
I did fill up I went to the quick check this morning, so the Wawa's mad at me.
But the Costco's at like $2.60.
Okay, there you go. And a hot dog and a soda for $2.50.
Do you get a free hot dog and soda
No, you
if you
do not.
fill up the tank?
So, I mean, do you get a cart or multiple carts when you go to the Costco?
Just one. Just
Okay,
one.
all right.
Yes, yes.
I didn't know.
Just myself.
There you go.
Gonna pack it into
Costco
the
report,
car.
Tom. You got to have it every Monday morning.
It's a valuable national commute. Good morning on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Good morning on YouTube. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red and green on the screen ahead of a new trading week. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 60 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 48 points. We have S&P futures little changed, up about a point. We have the 2-year yield at 4.31%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.47%, and that's up 2 basis points. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We have the Japanese yen lower at 154.96 against the dollar. We have the euro stronger, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up about 0.8% at around 89,000. To commodities, we have Brent crude $71 a barrel, WTI crude $67 a barrel, spot gold up more than 1.5% at around $2,600 an ounce. Checking back in with Tesla shares, they're up about 6%. Speculation President-elect Donald Trump's team will ease those self-driving car rules. And another company making news, that's BlackRock. It received a commercial license to operate in Abu Dhabi. And finally, back here in New York. New York Magazine says Bill Ackman has listed 2 3,000 square foot Central Park West apartments, a total of $19.9 million. That's actually 7 years after he bought them for $22 million. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Last time she was with us, we got a huge response. I think it's the mathiness.
Yeah, maths. That's how they say
maths.
it.
That's how they say it.
I don't know why they do that, but
I don't know why they do that. It's difference equations, first order difference equations. Amanda Rebello joins us now. She's with DWS. And before we get to all this fancy mumbo jumbo and the quintuple leveraged artificial intelligence big data ETF, are you kidding me? Just what are your thoughts on the magnitude of the money into Bitcoin ETFs? I mean, if I talk to somebody at BlackRock, I get a song and dance. Mm-hmm. What do you think at DWS of this moment?
I think it's really interesting. We have launched digital assets ETCs in our European platform. We definitely think that there is a place for them. But I think that one thing that's important, not just with Bitcoin, but with all exposures that can be wrapped in an ETF, do you understand the underlying, right? And so I think that at the end of the day, this is an access vehicle.
Okay,
but
Oxford mathematics. We just came back from the Boston Fed. We had the #1 payments guy in America, Emeritus Illinois, Professor Kahn, say Bitcoin is basically the new Beanie Babies. Do you know what a Beanie Baby is? Okay. That's where's the underlying in Bitcoin?
Yep.
Or is it a Beanie Baby, as Professor Kahn says?
I think I completely understand what Professor Kahn is saying. We always think about, in your CFA textbook, you're always thinking about valuation of an asset, but how do we value Bitcoin, right? So I think, at the end of the day, there is some degree of speculation, which is driving a lot of the volumes at the end of the day, probably more rather than less. So that's definitely something that I think all investors need to be aware of.
On the technology front, where at DWS are you seeing the flows? Is it still AI?
It is still AI. So we've launched a number of different technology-focused ETFs. So we have cybersecurity, semiconductors. We also have U.S. national critical technologies. But XAIX is the one that we're seeing flows going in on a daily basis on our U.S. side.
XAIX is the ticker.
We also have a European version as well. It's the largest artificial intelligence ETF in the world as of last Friday.
Cybersecurity. Lisa, here's the ticker for you for the cybersecurity ETF. PSWD password. How cool is that? How cool is that? So cybersecurity, in addition to before there was AI, I always told my kids, cybersecurity, that's like the new plastics. They're going to be spending money on cybersecurity forever. Right. Yeah. So is that, what are you seeing in that side of the tech trade?
Cybersecurity, we've seen it become much more important. I think beforehand, a lot of people were thinking about it in the earlier days of cybersecurity, as a theme, that it was more of a consumer kind of topic. But I think, with the Russia-Ukraine war, a lot of people have now seen that cybersecurity is really a defense topic much more than it has been in the past. We also know about, hackers in different geographies. This is their attempt at warfare, basically. It's easier to build or quicker to build than, building an army or a navy. Also different spends which are required as well. So I think everyone is understanding now that cybersecurity is important in a different dimension than just your McAfee or your, having a personal VPN.
Amanda Rebello with this expert on ETFs. We have Belchunas today as well.
Yeah.
It's just too much.
I know.
I got goosebumps. DWS Group here. I had a white paper 30 years ago that tried to model out not 20-to-1 hedge fund blow it up leverage, but where non-linearly from 1-to-1 out to a little bit of leverage, out to a little bit more leverage, do you run into problems? Here's Fidelity's propaganda. For professional investors, leveraged ETFs are useful in statistical arbitrage, short-term technical strategies, etc. Most people are buying them just to goose the return. Mm-hmm. Where's the tip point for you on where leverage is a really tough game to win at?
Yeah, the thing about the leveraged ETFs is that it's not, 2 times on a long-term basis or 3 times on a long-term basis. People need to understand this is a volatility resetting strategy, be it in an ETF, an ETN, in structured products. So I think when we start to see volatility increasing quite significantly, we're not at the highs of the market, but we are kind of teetering upwards, then you start to see that the payoff doesn't work in the way that a lot of the investors
have expected. Do you have a ratio where that payoff doesn't work? Is it 2-to-1, 3-to-1? The quintuple DWS X Tracker Tech Fund?
We do not, and we've decided, we've made a conscious decision to not be in the levered space here in the U.S.
I know, I offer the triple leverage cash flow.
Why is that? I mean, it seems to be popular products.
It would be, but I think that, there are some fantastic, competitor peers that we have in the market, like, who already own that space,
Okay.
so we don't need to be there.
All right, the Fed's cutting interest rates even though the bond yields are going higher. I don't know how that all works. What do you guys do from the ETF front to take advantage of a Federal Reserve that appears to be on a pretty significant path of rate cutting?
Yeah. So I think that, for the past couple of years or year and a bit, cash has yielded enough and it's, effectively risk-free that rotating into cash could have made sense. All of us, when we think about income requirements within portfolios, now 5 became the new norm a little bit, and so we need to think about how we're still going to generate that 5. So we like international dividends a lot. HDEF is our international high dividend strategy. Cool. We're known very much for international equities more broadly, just as a Frankfurt headquartered entity. But then that one has kind of around a 5% yield on average. Then we also think that international real estate can make sense as well. So HOUSE is the ticker, and REITs we always know are,
right?
yes,
Okay.
HAUZ, exactly. And then we usually feel that REITs, are income generators, same as infrastructure securities as well. So if you want to think about these as well as a way to generate kind of 4-5% yield, that makes sense. On the fixed income side, we really like high yield at the moment. Actually,
Really?
There's more of a quality component than there has been historically. So default rates have pretty much halved in the last 18 months. So much stronger, much more stable than historically. But then also you can now slice and dice high yield much more than you could do before. So thinking about the higher credit ratings within high yield, things like BHYB, which is our double B, single B ex financials. Also thinking about HY down, which is our low beta high yield product, which is kind of better than a fallen angels product because you're looking at the market already pricing in better credit quality with yield rather than waiting for the credit rating agencies to then make that call.
Fascinating stuff. I mean, Torsten Slok from Apollo was out with a note this weekend saying, hey, interest rates are higher for longer here, so the top of the high yield space is probably okay, but the lower end probably at risk when he was calling out interest coverage and all those types of things.
Exactly.
Are you seeing that in your investors? Do they want to take that lower end risk or no?
They're not brave enough yet, and
Right.
it's great to hear from Torsten, one of our former dear colleagues. We think that really segmenting high yield is making sense. That kind of crossover space is where you need to be, but I think that in certain sectors there's still uncertainty in terms of possibility of repaying debt, so stay away from there for now.
Amanda Rebello with us, head of X-Tracker sales. DWS Group, and we're going to beat this to death further. The next hour, Belchunas scheduled. Do we have a Belchunas sighting yet?
No, I'm tracking it.
You're tracking it.
Sell a
You
train.
got the little Apple tracker thing on him. He doesn't know where it is.
Yeah, it's approaching Trenton right now, so we're hoping for the best.
Great. We say good morning, particularly good morning to all of you listening and watching on YouTube in Brazil with David Gura at the G20 meetings. Good morning.
But he watches so sadly. How can he tell her he loves her? Yes, he would give his heart gladly. But each day when she walks to the sea, she looks straight ahead, not at him.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Michael Barr on assignment. Lisa Mateo in the house. Lisa, you've been doing these great Bloomberg events, like a lot.
I know.
Yes,
What was the
it's
last
finally
one you
winding
did?
down. The last one was in New York. That was another AI event, but it was really fantastic. Like just speaking with all these different companies, large companies, about how they're incorporating AI and the problems they've had, but also the success story.
When
that
she
they had.
travels,
Yeah.
it's like Audrey Hepburn in Charade. It's like 8 suitcases from
Yep.
Louis Vuitton.
The hat
If
box.
you go to
7.
Rio, let me know. I'll carry your suitcases for you. We say good morning on your morning commute on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Good morning on Sirius. I got yelled at. Sirius XM. Tom, you never say it. I think it's channel 123. Sirius XM. Good morning.
121.
121. Thank you, Ari. Sirius XM. It's out there. It's big. It's way bigger than I thought.
Sure.
Good morning on your commute. Good morning, 99.1 FM. Washington, 92.9 FM, Boston, and all of New England. And good morning, our flagship, Bloomberg 1130 in New York. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning were brought to you by BAM Mutual Insurers. They insure municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provide guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of building America. Invest in BAM insured bonds. BAM Mutual, thank you so much for your support this morning. Paul, what do you see on the screen? To me, it's all the real yields up.
Yep.
I'm sorry, the real yield's talking to us.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. So we got the yields at 2-year Treasury, 4.29%, and the 10-year's at 4.45%. So we do have that steep yield curve. So we'll have to see. But the Fed, they tell us to continue cutting rates.
Are McGlone and Alex Steele on the same page? I mean, is it like oil, $59 a barrel?
Boy, McGlone has been really good on this. He said
Yes.
this thing's going to 40 before it goes to 150. I'm like, okay.
Right.
He's been calling that, and he's been
I talked to him
right.
this weekend. He said Miami's no Rio.
No, exactly.
He made clear. David Gura in Rio for the G20 meetings. Look, the balance of power here at 12 noon for some good perspective on this. Joining us right now with the worst job on Wall Street, Stephanie Roth with us, chief economist at Wolfe Research. I got to do the flash first. Excuse me.
It's in Lisa's contract.
It is.
I know.
We covered equities, but we didn't do bonds and currencies. With a better data check than I could do with our interactive brokers, Bloomberg Business Flash, El Mateo.
You got it. And we've got futures mixed. NASDAQ futures actually leading the gains right now, up about 0.3%, 68 points. A big part of that, Tesla shares. They're up about 6%. Sources say President-elect Donald Trump's team looking to push the development of fully self-driving vehicles. That's the reason for that. Now we go to Dow futures. Little change, down about 41 points. We have S&P futures, little changed, up about 4. We have the 2-year yield at 4.29%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.46%, and that's up about 1 basis point. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index right now down about 0.1%. We have the Japanese yen weaker, euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up about 0.7% at around 89,000, recovering from that biggest 2-day retreat since the U.S. vote. Shares of Nvidia falling, down 2%. That's following that report over its Blackwell chips. It's led to concerns about delays. And finally, another company making news, that would be Spirit Airlines, filed for bankruptcy in New York, listing assets and liabilities between $1 billion and $10 billion. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. The VIX 16.57. Stephanie Roth with us with Wolfe. Steph, I was all excited because you're in the process now of putting together your year-ahead view at Wolfe Research to be published December-ish, maybe before or after around the jobs report of December 6th, I believe it is. How do you do that knowing the uncertainty of our politics, knowing the uncertainty of our economy? Do you rewrite it in January?
One important thing to think about is a lot of what the policies that Trump might put in place are going to be important for 2026. So 2025, in a way, it's going to be about animal spirits, and it's going to be about immigration to some extent, but that's going to be the bulk of what we see for 2025, which for us is actually a decent economy. On immigration, it's probably not going to have as big an impact as many think from an inflation perspective because the labor market's now back in better balance. So we don't necessarily need the influx of people the way we did 2 years ago. Now, when we're talking about 2026, then it becomes all about tariffs and the uncertainty that creates. But this is probably not a 2025 story.
How about the deficit? It seems like a story that's every year. So, and I've been seeing some numbers. We were just talking to someone earlier who was talking about, they can increase the deficit by trillions of dollars. How concerned are you, if at all, about that?
Sure. Trump has thrown out $11 trillion worth of tax cuts. Is he going to get that all done? No. So we're looking for, a tax cut that could be a couple $1 trillion, something like a net of 3. Okay. But that's not that different from what Harris was proposing. So the bond market should be okay with that. And by the way, we're looking for something that's going to extend TCJA. And then beyond that, we're forecasting about $500 billion of additional net tax increases, which is tax cuts, which is really not that impactful.
I mentioned December, I think it's 6, is the jobs report. Do you look at the negative statistic with revisions last time as truly hurricane-induced, or is there more going on right now in the labor economy?
It's very likely hurricane-induced. And we're going to learn a lot more about that when we get state employment tomorrow at 10 a.m. That's one of the most important.
Whoa, stop the show. Take notes.
State employment? That's not on my screen.
So this is going to be the most important data point from an economic perspective this week.
What are you doing tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Sweeney and Alex want to know.
State unemployment. So what do we learn from that kind of data?
So we're going to get this helped us in a big way look at Texas after Beryl, because we got a sense of the extent of the hurricane impact on the data, and then we could assume we get that back the next month. And this is going to be the same thing. We're going to look at Florida most importantly to see to what extent did Florida drag down the overall payrolls. And if it was significant, then we know we should be able to add that back.
Okay, so this is state reports. What do they go into that we normally report?
So what they're going it's BLS. It's just telling you basically what happened from a state perspective from employment
30
in the last
days
month.
ago? In the last month?
In the last month. So from the last payroll reading, we got that 12 number, which was terrible.
So you're going to look at North Carolina.
Exactly. We're going to look at the Carolinas. Georgia. We're going to look at Florida, Georgia. And if we see a notable decline, then we can know that that's probably hurricane related. And the next month, you'll get payback in a positive way.
How's the consumer out there from your perspective? We had some retail sales recently. How do you think about that?
So the retail sales print was very funky. So it was negative on core, but then when you dig into it, you had pretty big revisions for the month prior. So when we take a 3-month average, you're looking at a 0.29% month on month, which is annualized about 3.5%. Not great, but not terrible. Mm-hmm. And we have to kind of look at it into perspective. It's probably you didn't have an incredibly strong September and an incredibly weak October. You probably have to think of some sort of average between the two. And it was likely related to a stronger, a better weather forecast or better unseasonably strong weather in terms of September. That boosted the print, and one reason why we got the significant positive revisions in September. You also had an early back-to-school season. So the combination of these things lifted September and dragged October because you got a bit of a payback from that.
What's your real GDP and nominal GDP call 12 months forward?
12 months forward, we're looking for something like 2.5% real GDP.
Solid.
Solid GDP, and something inflation that's 2.2.
4-ish.
2.4-ish, so something almost 5% in terms of nominal.
So how do they react to that at the Fed? I mean, that's solid, right?
It's solid. It's complicated for the Fed, right? Because they don't want to forecast any of the fiscal stuff. So they're going to probably want to cut a couple more times. They told us that. What they really should be doing is saying, we want to cut to something like 4%, and then we're going to see where the economy is, because that's the message that we're getting from them. They say they're data dependent, but they continue to want to cut even though the data has been stronger and inflation a little bit stickier.
So quickly here, do you suggest that the December meeting, December 18, and then over into the next meeting, I can't believe I'm saying 2025, I'm such a fossil, January 29, those two meetings give them still a lot of wiggle room to cut?
I think they have wiggle room to cut at one of the next two. Probably not at both.
Okay.
And
that's as close as I get to Fed chat.
That's good.
Did I do okay?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, they'll probably want to cut at one of the two, and then cut at some sort of quarterly cadence until the middle part of next year.
This is like talking to Henrietta Treyz. I didn't know anything about the state report tomorrow. Did you?
No, I barely do the.
Lisa, did you keep it from us?
Yes. She will have to
Stephanie,
report
you're
it
brilliant. Stephanie Roth, huge value add there from Wolfe Research on these important state data tomorrow, and people having a tough time down in the Carolinas and on down to Florida. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, the search for Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary has devolved into disarray. The president-elect fuming over behind-the-scenes jockeying after publicly endorsing counterfeits Charles Howard Lutnick. Sources tell Bloomberg Trump confidant Elon Musk spoke to potential pick Scott Bessent this weekend. Now, Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel says Trump's considering other names, and that includes Senator Bill Hagerty, the former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and Mark Rowan of Apollo, and adds that they'll play a critical role in the incoming administration.
The Treasury Secretary, their main job is to oversee the Treasury market, which is one of the most important markets in the globe, with $28 trillion of Treasury securities that they're in charge of looking over. But they also will play a role in privately conveying reason to the new Trump administration with respect to how much they can potentially spend.
Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel says President-elect Trump's consideration comes as he continues to fill his incoming cabinet at a rapid pace. Over the weekend, the president-elect picked Brendan Carr as the new chair of the FCC. He also picked Chris Wright, who runs a Colorado-based fracking services company, to lead the energy department. President Biden gave Ukraine the green light to use Western-made missiles for long-range strikes on Russian territory. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told reporters, despite the change, the goal remains peace and ending the war.
All of us would want to see this resolved soon, sooner versus later. But again, we want to make sure that Ukraine is in the best position to protect its interest, however it's resolved in the future. And I believe that, as you've heard me say before, at the end of the day, it will be resolved through negotiation.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. The shift in policy thought to be motivated by North Korean troops appearing on the battlefield to fight alongside the Russian troops. And Beyonce headed to your house on Christmas, provided you have Netflix and you're tuning into the Baltimore Ravens Houston Texans game. Netflix announcing that the megastar will perform during halftime of a Christmas Day matchup in her hometown of Houston. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. 3, 4, 5 years ago, Amazon did a streaming thing. It was a failure. I remember it. The sports, it wasn't clear. It was fuzzy. They can't screw this up after the boxing thing that Lisa went to yesterday.
No, and I think partially it's just the demand that gets placed upon the system, the bandwidth.
Okay, but we know that.
So many people.
We know that.
So I guess it's just a technological thing. They've got to just figure out how to, serve that.
Can you
audience.
imagine the meetings this morning?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, who won? Was it
Lisa, the other one.
Gosh,
oh, the younger guy.
Yes, Jake Paul. It was very sad. It was.
But a lot of people, Lisa Mateo, said it was boring.
It was very
in
boring.
what way was it boring?
They built it up. They had Tyson in the ring, like fighting all these big, series. They had a whole series on it. And then they get in the ring and he's just kind of dancing around, biting on his glove, like moving around, a couple ducks and moves.
I didn't know you were a boxing fan.
Well,
Nice,
I'm
nice.
Latino. That's like our big
That's your thing.
tradition. I grew
Are you
up watching
doing
boxing.
when you're do that again? I mean, what was
Oh, the
Tyson
bob and
doing?
weave. He's doing this and he's
Is
biting
that
his
the
glove.
Trump
I'm
shake
thinking,
you're
what's
doing?
he
The Trump
doing?
dance?
It was just really bad. It was very bad.
Lisa Mateo, thank you for that brief from New York City. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report is brought to you by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we've got little movement in futures. Traders just awaiting some fresh direction on growth, also the path of interest rates. Housing actually leads this week's economic data. We get some information from the National Association of Home Builders. That comes out at 10 o'clock today. Tomorrow, the government's read on housing starts, and Thursday it's October home resales. Nasdaq futures up 0.4%, 89 points. Dow futures little change, down about 30. S&P futures up 0.1% or 8 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.29%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.45%, and that is little changed as well. To commodities, gold rose more than 1%. Goldman Sachs analysts predicted it would hit a record by the end of next year. We have spot gold at $2,607 an ounce. Over to Brent crude, $72 a barrel. WTI crude, $68 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.1%. We have Japanese yen weaker. Euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up more than 1% at around 90,000. Companies making news. HSBC reportedly asking managers to reapply for their job. It's part of the firm's new corporate institutional banking division. The problem is it's sparking some competition because it's pitting senior staff who came from that commercial banking division against those from the global banking and markets unit. We'll see what happens there. The Wall Street Journal reporting that CVS Health adding 4 new members to its board. It's an agreement with Glenview Capital Management. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. The day wanders forward in Rio. They're an hour ahead of us. I think so. 2 hours, really. It's 11:15 in Rio.
All right.
Gura is setting up for lunch at the Copacabana Palace. We get him before lunchtime. David Gura at the G20 meetings. David, the chart of the weekend coming off the Wall Street Journal. I just put it out. James Arity, Ryan Dubé, and Roque Reyes. I hope I'm butchering the pronunciations. David, in 2000, the U.S. owns South America. China's taken over except for a little bit up north. That's got to be the theme in the backstory at G20. Does the U.S. have a plan to compete with China in South America?
No, not at this point. And I'll tell a little anecdote here just to illustrate the point that you just made from that chart. We were up at Sugarloaf Mountain yesterday. I looked at the signage about the park that we were in, and on that sign was a note that a Chinese energy concern was one of the sponsors of beautifying that really iconic part of this city. So you're right. A lot of Chinese money has flowed into this country, this whole continent, and the U.S. has kind of sat idly by. Yes, there have been allies in the region, of course, lots of turmoil in the many decades past, but there is no plan now, and I think that speaks to kind of the broader conversation that's happening here. What is the plan for U.S. engagement going forward? Yes, President Biden, who's here, can talk about his perspective, his outlook on that kind of global engagement, but everybody here knows, Tom and Paul, that come January 20th, things are going to change pretty radically.
And I don't want confusion here. Sugarloaf Mountain is in Rio, not in Maine. Good morning, 92.9 FM, Boston. Sugarloaf, Maine, projected opening November 22nd.
Oh, there you go. Vail opened this past weekend. David, what is the agenda, the stated agenda for G20 down there in Rio, versus what do you think really people are going to be focusing on?
Yeah, so you look at the official agenda items. There are conversations happening about climate and development and sustainability. But really the conversation increasingly is centering on the issue of Ukraine. So let's talk a bit about what's developed over the course of the weekend. There was that announcement that trickled out that the U.S. is going to supply more weapons that could be used for fighting by the Ukrainians against Russia. That's certainly the subject of conversation on the sidelines here, and I think is holding up agreement on that communique, that statement that's going to come out of this meeting. There's also something else that's being talked about here, too, and that's the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, had a conversation with Vladimir Putin of Russia just a few days ago, and that's a really extraordinary moment. You know, we had a piece over the weekend, Bloomberg News did, just about the number of Ukrainian allies who are beginning to warm to the idea that this has to kind of come to a negotiated settlement soon. So Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor, did tip off the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, that he was going to have that conversation, had the call with President Putin, and then called Zelensky back to update him on it. So over the course of the next 36 hours here in Rio, there are going to be a lot of people who are seeking a few minutes with the German chancellor to hear about how that phone call went and indeed to think about what those next steps might be. Again, with this added variable of Donald Trump coming back into office, we know that Donald Trump on the campaign trail said with some braggadocio that he could solve that conflict on day one. That may not happen, but it does seem like there's a movement toward trying to figure out the way in which it ends, and perhaps that phone call was, if not the first step, a pivotal step forward.
So what is the feeling of the G20 as it relates just to China more broadly, David? Is it one of engagement? Is it one of, I don't know, isolation, tariffs, all those types of, is there any kind of consensus of where the G20 would like to move as it relates to China?
It feels like it's one of more engagement. There's some trepidation about that. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, met with President Xi this morning. They spoke to reporters afterward, and it was clear that Keir Starmer brought up human rights, brought up Taiwan. We know that the press was ushered out by those Chinese officials as those remarks started happening. So he's kind of learning the ropes here as a leader on the global stage. But you know, as this goes on, you piece together who's meeting with whom, and it's an increasingly longer list of folks who are meeting with President Xi. And of course, Joe Biden did sit down with him in Peru at the APAC summit right before this to talk about the relationship between the two of them and the relationship between the two countries, the U.S. and China. So it's one of engagement, I think kind of cautious but constructive engagement. And indeed, the remarks that we heard from President Xi after that conversation with President Biden was, look, we want to have constructive relationships with other countries, but we're going to fight back if countries cross certain red lines.
David, I hate you. I can hear the ocean going up against the shore. You hear that, Lisa? It's just, he's killing us here. David, I got to get back to Ukraine and the missiles. The American missiles we have, ATACMS, our Ling-Temco vote. David, you don't even know what that is. Ling-Temco vote was a conglomerate from 1 million years ago. It's now Lockheed Martin, Camden, Arkansas, 71701. David Gura, is there going to be an American missile in some parking lot in Russia with an address, Camden, Arkansas, 71701?
There very well could be, and there was a briefing this morning by the Deputy National Security Advisor here in Rio in which he talked about the prospects for the U.S. allowing this to happen, not confirming it in the conversation that he had with reporters, but it's quite clear that there'll be very strict parameters on how Ukraine can use those weapons going forward. Obviously, it's something that Ukraine has been pushing for since the beginning of this war, to have access to more sophisticated, stronger ammunition to fight Russia and indeed to use it on Russia, on Russian soil. It's something that the U.S. and other allies have really pushed back against and have not let happen. And I think it's part of this broader conversation. We talk a lot about Joe Biden's legacy, what he's trying to sort of solidify here in the final 2 months of his presidency. Part of that has to do with how he has supported Ukraine and wants to continue supporting them going forward, at least till the end of his presidency. He's really trying actively, and he said this explicitly, to get them all the support, all the ammunition that they need going forward here. And you know, you bring up Arkansas. There was that moment on the campaign trail, I don't know if you remember it, Tom, when President Zelensky was in the U.S. for the UN General Assembly and toured an ammunition factory in Pennsylvania. It became a huge hot-button issue. He was accused of sort of politicizing the war in the context of domestic U.S. politics. Obviously, there's just a veneer of caution that goes into this that the Pentagon is very well aware of, that the White House is very well aware of, and is having to navigate here in Rio.
David, break for lunch. David Gura, reporting from the G20 meetings in Rio. Lisa Mateo going down in the Gulf Stream this afternoon to help out.
Very good.
There as well. Paul, Nvidia, is it Wednesday? I think so.
No, but boy, I want to see that earnings report because, you know, the question is, are they still
Is anyone awake in the control room?
Yeah, I mean, are the numbers still there? Because, I mean, quarter after quarter, the bar is so high in terms of expectations, but they tend to clear it every time.
There's only 29,600 employees. I had no idea it was that small. Nvidia, 50 is the forward PE, and compare that with Microsoft, which is 32.
Yep. Stock up 186% year to date. Look at this market cap, Tom. $3.48 trillion.
In market cap per employee, sales per employee are wow numbers.
Wow numbers. Yeah, wow numbers. So, I mean, this has been, Tom, kind of the poster child for, I need AI exposure, and that's what I'm going to buy.
We need to get the markets open. Red and green on the screen. NASDAQ up 0.4% on futures. The Calvacina Index, the Russell 2000 up 0.4% as well. Please watch us on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast on YouTube Podcasts.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And our opening bell report is brought to you by BNY. BNY's expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit BNY.com. All right, we've got a lot of focus in this week. President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Treasury Secretary. We also have more housing data this week. And we can't forget, of course, Nvidia opens its books on Wednesday. So how are the markets going to react? Let's check in right now as we get things started. We'll start with the S&P 500. Right now, little changed, up about 1 point. We have the Dow down about 0.1%. They're down about 50 points at 43,389. We have the Nasdaq up about 0.1%, 32 points at 18,711. We have the 2-year yield at 4.29%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.45%, and that's up about 1 basis point. To commodities, we have Brent crude $72 a barrel, WTI crude $68 a barrel. We have spot gold up more than 1.5% at $2,604 an ounce. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We have the Japanese yen weaker, euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up more than 1% at around 90,000. At the open, also checking with shares of Nvidia down 1.5% and shares of Tesla up 5%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Thank you so much, Lisa. There's important breaking news. Dr. Wong will have to wait. Anna Wong, stay with us and be patient, please. You got to be kidding me. The pride of Don Bosco Prep.
Yep.
Syracuse in Illinois.
Yep.
He's like your fave, right?
Sure.
You've got his jersey at home. And,
absolutely.
And Mr. DeVito is going to start for the 2-8 New York football Giants.
That's exactly the news coming out. The New York Giants have benched the struggling Daniel Jones and are expected to name Tommy DeVito as their new starting quarterbacks. This is all according to ESPN. Tommy DeVito, fondly known to his fans as Tommy Cutlets.
Okay. One more question because Dr. Wong's comments are too important. Paul Sweeney, New York football is 5-16.
Terrible.
Why?
I really don't know. People can say management. People say ownership.
Players don't want to play here?
No, I don't think so. I just think they just haven't had good teams for the longest time. Even, Aaron Rodgers couldn't get it done with the Jets.
Anna Wong joins us now asking, I went to Chicago for 8 years to listen to New York Giants football chat. Let me put this in perspective, folks. I have never seen an economist quoted by other economists ever like Anna Wong of Bloomberg. She's our chief U.S. economist. Anna Wong, Dr. Wong, let's start with why are other economists talking about your research? What have you said and written in the last 6 months that gets the national attention in economics?
I actually have not heard myself quoted by other economists, but thank you, Tom. I suppose I've been writing a lot about the labor market in the last 6 months. I guess other economists noticed that we switched our model and our accuracy for forecasting the non-farm payrolls became suddenly very accurate.
Within that is the idea of the grievous statistic hurricane-induced last time around is going to set up a 3 or 6 month moving average is pretty lousy. Is that where we're heading?
Well, the reason why there was a 2 standard deviation downside surprise to the last payroll was really because of weaknesses in professional and business sector driven by temp jobs. And that tends to be the hurricane in the tempest, or the hurricane in the teacup, or what's that saying? That says,
I know, it's too late in the morning.
It's that little thing that people ignore that could become a hurricane. It's not the actual hurricane itself. But typically, in a slowing labor market, you see temp jobs the first to fall, and that was what struck us in the last payroll, and it's geographically very broad-based too. So looking forward to the next payroll, it looks like that you will have that typical statistical bounce after a hurricane, and it could be substantial, but we will be keeping an eye out for that undercurrent of weakness in these temp jobs and these cyclical sectors.
Anna, since the election, a lot of market participants are trying to figure out what some of President-elect Trump's policies, economic policies, may mean to this economy. And the concern is they may be inflationary and reaccelerate inflation in this country. Is that a risk, and from your perspective?
Well, certainly it's a risk, but it's not to the near universal consensus that you would be reading from other economists, in my view. So particularly what matters is what the Fed thinks, right? And I actually worked in the international division of the Fed and also in the White House during the first Trump administration. I think that the body of empirical work built up around what tariffs do to the economy was significantly expanded. And it's so theoretically, Econ 101 would tell you, yes, tariffs are inflationary. But in fact, the other factors to consider, and the Fed staff did consider, ran models on this, is what if the tariffs are imposed on intermediate goods and capital goods, as opposed to consumption goods like your iPhone.
Right.
And in fact, in the first trade war, that was exactly what happened. The Council of Economic Advisors, in collaboration with USTR, came up with an algorithm that actually focused on what kind of tariffs could minimize the harm to the economy. And that list focused on intermediate and capital goods. And Fed also ran a model that showed that, in fact, tariffs on those goods, it would actually be disinflationary, as opposed to consumption goods, which would be inflationary.
Well, this is really important, and we don't, it's a Monday, folks, and, Paul's getting ready for Alex Steele to return here in 28 minutes. It's like a Fed countdown.
It is.
Get the Alex Steele returns countdown clock. Work that up for us. Anna Wong, what you just said is brilliant. And if we do an intermediate goods tariff, can the shock of shocks for the second Trump term be disinflation or a vector towards true deflation?
Yeah, I think it would be, honestly, I think it's slightly more likely to be disinflationary, given my understanding, our baseline. So we have developed a baseline of what that trade war version 2 would look like. I think it would be focused on intermediate goods and capital goods, just like the first time. And I think it wouldn't go all the way universal tariffs as Trump suggested, because it's just counter to his transactional approach toward trade war, which is he likes to do it country by country on a bilateral basis. If you raise tariff on everybody at the same time, what leverage or bargaining power do you have if you start off from a weak, leverage point, economic standpoint, right? You have no leverage to bargain with other countries. So given our baseline, we actually think the hit on the trade war would primarily be on investment, on quantities, and on the stock market.
So, Anna, put all this kind of into perspective. What does it mean for the U.S. consumer here? I mean, some folks are saying, hey, watch these animal spirits going forward. This is going to be a good thing for the consumer. How do you view the U.S. consumer?
Yeah, so the animal spirit is definitely there. We see it in all these surveys, right? And this week we're going to get a lot of soft survey data, and I think all of them is going to show have evidence of this animal spirit, and that should unleash this pent-up demand for investment on the firms. And I think in 2025 we're going to see a pickup in investment due to this animal spirit. I think the trade war version 2 won't seriously ramp up until 2026. Because we need the support. The administration needs the support of the extension of TICSA to be effective, and all those expansionary fiscal policies they plan to be supporting the economy before they do start to begin the trade war. Because if you just do it out front in 2025, that would just tank the stock market, which is, I think, Trump is rational enough to know that's not the proper sequencing of policies.
Dr. Wong, thank you so much. And again, congratulations. The impact of Bloomberg U.S. economics is noted. Red and green on the screen. NASDAQ up a nice 0.3%. The VIX, it's some tension here. The VIX is, remember we were at 22?
Yeah.
The world was coming to an end?
Exactly.
Down to 14.
Yep.
And we've pulled back. But that gives a good indication of how much we've pulled back as well. I don't,
You got your Bitcoin north of 90,000 again, Tom.
Oh, you're killing me. Let's for Alex Steele, $68. She comes back, crude rockets up $1.65. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney, look for that here in 20 minutes. With our news in New York City, here's John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Axios is reporting that President-elect Trump will meet with former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh and the co-founder of Apollo, Mark Rowan, at Mar-a-Lago this week. Warsh and Rowan are on Trump's list of possible Treasury Secretary picks. Meantime, Bloomberg's Laura Davison says this latest news comes as the selection process for Treasury Secretary appears to have fallen into disarray.
The discussions, instead of getting narrower, have been getting more expansive. Trump has been frustrated by some of the jockeying that we've seen between some of the who were the leading contenders last week, folks like Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, and he's asked his advisors to present some other alternatives. So we've seen other folks like Bill Hagerty, Senator Bill Hagerty, come into the mix.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison reports Mr. Trump has tried to move quickly on his other cabinet choices. It's now unclear when he's going to make a decision on Treasury. Chinese leader Xi Jinping used his final meeting with President Biden to send a clear message to Donald Trump. China wants to be friends, but is ready for a fight if necessary. They met during the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Lima, Peru over the weekend. And Bloomberg executive editor for Greater China, John Liu, says Xi outlined 4 red lines in China's relationship with the U.S. that are targeted at Trump.
One, that the U.S. should not seek to contest the Communist Party's grip on power in China, that the United States should not try to push China to become a democracy, that the United States should not try to contain China's economic rise, and lastly, and probably most importantly, that the United States should not support Taiwanese independence. And so it did seem President Xi, ahead of a new Trump administration, trying to put some guardrails, bumpers around where this relationship could go.
Bloomberg's John Lee adds that President-elect Trump has tapped several hardliners on China to lead his foreign policy team, having campaigned on hitting Beijing with tariffs of 60%. And the U.S. is allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. A Kremlin spokesman calling it an escalation as Ukraine's allies look for new ways to bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. And the national average gasoline price is set to fall below $3 a gallon just in time for Thanksgiving, when the holiday travel is expected to climb back to pre-pandemic levels. The national average retail fuel price already has fallen to the lowest since January, floating just a few cents above its 2021 level. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg.
So, if I get in the car for Thanksgiving dinner, because I refuse to cook, and I go 3 blocks below 60th Street, am I going to pay a Thanksgiving congestion tax? Is that how quick this is coming on?
No, after the new year. So.
After the new year.
So.
Okay.
So get your parking pass at 61st Street. You're all set.
There are other alternatives in the mix.
Okay, thank you to the
rather not mention.
The New York Post for this. If the quarterback is injured, whoever's being benched at the New York Giants, and can't pass a physical by March, I couldn't pass it either. The Giants' dead salary cap charge goes from $22 million to $45 million.
And an incremental $23 million if Daniel Jones were to get injured in the remainder
So they're
of this
benching
season.
Him.
Right.
I mean,
for a variety of reasons.
Oh, stop.
Including the financial reason of they don't want to take the risk of
This is a
getting injured.
$23 million benching, and they put the piece of meat from Don Bosco Prep in.
Tommy Cutlets.
Even I figured this out.
Are the Giants looking at Aaron
Oh, you
Rodgers?
think this is funny, Lisa?
I just like the little move he does.
The little money.
When he goes in, he goes, hey.
So, the fans loved him. He actually
love
played
him.
pretty well last year for a short period of time. So,
Short, like what?
Yeah, so
5 minutes?
this is the Giants just kind of waving the white flag, and let's regroup.
I watched a little bit this weekend, and the number of ads in NFL football. Pharaoh got me onto English soccer. There's no ads.
No.
They just play.
Right. So and they're all promoting their shows on their network. So that's part of the value as well.
Okay, it's a value.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, that's how it works.
My head is spinning. From New York City, stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Looks like stocks kind of have a case of the Mondays. Not much movement to start the week. We have the NASDAQ up about 0.1%, 18 points, 18,699. The Dow down about 0.1%, 69 points, 43,376. The S&P 500 little changed at 5,870. We have the two-year yield 4.29%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.45%, and that's up 1 basis point. To currencies, we have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.1%. We have the Japanese yen weaker, euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up more than 1% at around 90,000. To commodities, Brent crude up more than 1.5%, $72 a barrel. WTI crude $68 a barrel. We have spot gold up more than 1.5% as well at $2,607 an ounce. Shares of server maker Super Microcomputer up 20%. It's approaching this deadline to either file a delayed 10K annual report or submit a plan to file them into form to NASDAQ. That's in order to remain listed. And then we finally have some media moves. LeBron James's media company Spring Hill has decided to merge with their Kardashians producer Fullwell 73. Investors adding $40 million to the business. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate that. Right now joining us, the smooth, remember the song Smooth Operator?
Yep.
He's the smoothest operator at Bloomberg. We got Gura in Rio. Eric Balchunas will join us, and seriously, he gets up in front of 1,200 people on ETFs and you're a pin drop. Where is your next pin drop? Are you traveling to Rio next?
I actually just did a Brazil presentation, Sao Paulo, but it was virtual because I had too much going on in the U.S.
Yeah,
of course, more bang for the buck here than going all the way there. So I did it virtually, but it went well. But I'm pretty much settling in for the next 3 months.
For the holidays.
Yeah, I'm coaching my kids' basketball teams, so I want to be local till that season's over.
BitDog is too good to be true. If you were to write 10 pages right now in Bitcoin ETFs, what would you write?
Anomaly. I'd call, I'm in the process of pitching a book on this, and the working title is probably nothing, because that's the phrase all the crypto people use when I point out the flows and this. They're like, oh, probably nothing.
That's a strong title.
It is a strong title,
within
right?
All the
my agent calls it an anti-title.
Yeah, well, they're right.
Anyway, all the books want to have numbers like 6 ways to do Bitcoin ETFs.
Balchunas has an agent, and we don't. What are we, small potatoes? Continue.
Okay, sorry. The Bitcoin ETFs, let me give you some stats here. So I bit $40 billion, okay? It's now in the top 1% of all ETFs. And it got to 40 billion, Tom, in 211 days. Up until that, the ETF to get to 40 billion the fastest was IMG at 1,253 days. So it is like an anomaly in physics. And with the price going up, you get this like extra possible FOMO kicking in. So I don't know where all this ends. As you know, it is a commodity, so it's only worth what someone else will pay for it. But there's a lot of wholesalers out there. You've got BlackRock, Fidelity, Invesco, not to mention some smaller shops that are really into it and local native to the space. So it just feels like, I was just said on Twitter earlier, or X, that if I was to define the year with a phrase, it would be beta with the side of Bitcoin. That's essentially, if you look at the flows, it's SPY, VU, IVV, and IBIT.
So, I mean, how do we know where to go
why?
here when you walk in here? I mean, I get tongue-tied. BlackRock, are they leading this thing forward?
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, IBIT is the GLD of Bitcoin, confirmed. Now it's trading.
Is Bitcoin going to be a bigger ETF category than gold?
Yeah, we think it's going to triple gold. Here's why. With Bitcoin, you get 2 for 1. It's a 2-for-1 deal. You get the store of value, but you get its hot sauce. GLD is 4,000 years old, and it moves like a 4,000-year-old. It's very slow.
Why are you looking at me like
Sorry. Bitcoin, 16 years old, much more volatile. And in the modern portfolio, when everyone has listened to Jack Bogle and married cheap index funds for their core, they're looking for a little excitement while that compounds over 30 years. And so gold doesn't give you that hot sauce speculative, rush. Bitcoin gives you that, plus it's a currency debasement hedge. So I think
currency debasement hedge.
Yes.
What is that?
So, like, if you think about, again, I think that in order to even entertain Bitcoin, you have to have one thing in your brain. You have to kind of acknowledge that governments across the world are going to continue to print money and debase their own currencies to solve problems because it's politically expedient. If you don't think that, you'll never come around on Bitcoin, ever. So that's what I found Bitcoin is. Some people are like, it has no purpose, no sense.
Right.
But that's why people are using it. That's how BlackRock is marketing it. They even show a chart of the purchasing power of the dollar since the Fed came out. You used to see those charts like in the deep corners of crypto Twitter. Now BlackRock is out there traveling the world showing people this chart. So that to me is what people are using it for, especially in the emerging markets. That's where actually holding it directly, I think, even has more of an appeal. In the U.S., a little less so. But I think people do like to have that feeling like their real return might not be as bad if you have a little Bitcoin. And we might see corporations actually buy it as a reserve asset.
Here's the story that Matt Miller emailed me this morning, Tom. You'll love this. MicroStrategy, which is theoretically a software company, bought about 51,780 Bitcoin for around $4.6 billion, the largest purchase by the crypto hedge fund proxy since it began acquiring the digital asset 4 years ago. What is up with that?
Yeah, so, Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy, I don't cover it. It's not under my purview, really, but it's, he kind of just reminds me of that scene in Tin Cup where he just keeps asking for the golf ball again. This guy is all in on this particular thing. And, in a way, he's been right. The stock keeps going up. But it's so hardcore and it's so all in. You're just watching this going, how's this going to end up? Right.
The bottom line, and you're a great student of history on this as well, is the adverb suddenly is operative. If Bitcoin breaks, does it noodle for years and gradually go down, or do you worry about suddenly?
Yeah, so certainly. I mean, I just think that if the other coins, to me, have a little more of that potential. I think Bitcoin is different. I think it is like a digital gold.
Why is Bitcoin different from the Doge?
Yeah, because in my opinion, Bitcoin is truly decentralized. It really is. It's based off of Cold War military technology. And so there's decentralized computers. There's no CEO. And in a time where, governments can control the monetary supply with such force, I think there'll always be some demand for that. The other thing is it has survived like 4 or 5 certain deaths. It's like a cockroach.
Well,
it keeps coming back.
Is it surviving because of the constraint of countable supply versus gold in the Gilded Age? They found the Yukon to save gold?
I think both can survive. I think you're going to find gold always will have a use. People want to wear jewelry. Gold has that.
Lisa, take a note of it.
Bitcoin, though, I think not only is its resiliency, that's what first made me respect it, at least. I didn't understand. I'm like, man, it keeps coming back from like near certain death. And then it comes back, it makes new all-time highs. That's one. And I think the energy and the enthusiasm of its believers is, I'm not sure you can really eliminate that and extinguish it. There is a religious aspect to it, and it's a fervor. And so I wouldn't totally say it would go to zero. But I do feel like there could be a face-ripping sell-off between now and the next couple of years that these ETF people are going to have to deal. But I think they'll deal with it better than people think.
We got to go because we're waiting for Alex Steele. Her entourage just went by, and we're waiting for Alex and Paul here. It's 10 a.m. I mean, did you spend too long in the green room this time? I mean, did you spend an hour in the green room waiting for your moment on Bloomberg Surveillance?
No, I was downstairs. Eric actually had to call me up. I got a big day today. Monday's my big day.
Well, you're with us.
This is the start.
Four-day work from home, right?
He's actually in New York, yes.
This is the start of a lot. I've got a lot going on. We're interviewing Vanguard for the podcast, and we've got NASDAQ on
lunch
ETF
at McDonald's
IQ.
around the corner.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A.
Okay. Eric Belchutis, thank you so much. Really informative, seriously, on Bitcoin. Greatly appreciate that. What a Monday. Hey, Alex Steele coming up with Paul Sweeney, Bloomberg Intelligence. Gura, it's lunchtime in Rio.
And young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, each one she passes goes, ah. When she walks, she's like a samba that swings so cool and sways so gentle that when she passes, each one she passes goes, ooh. But I watch her so sad.